Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I remember stepping out onto that cold March night, the wind cutting through my uniform like a razor. The streetlights on Westvale Drive were flickering, halogen bulbs on their last legs, casting uneven pools of yellow light across the pavement. My boots scraped against the damp asphalt as I walked toward the Foley residence. It was 2:37 a.m. on the first day of my third week working the graveyard shift. I'd been on this beat for nearly 18 years and had grown accustomed to the stillness that settled over neighborhoods after midnight. The faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional barking dog, and the way even the most ordinary sounds seemed amplified in the quiet. But there was something different about tonight. A tension in the air, almost like the storm that was supposed to roll in before dawn, but heavier, more charged, like an electric current under my skin. Dispatch had sent me because of a 911 call from an elderly woman named Clara Foley. She lived with her cat, Hermione, in a modest split-level home, 2 blocks from the corner gas station. According to the recording, she'd woken to the sound of her own name being whispered from outside her bedroom window, just enough for her to make out the syllables, drawn out, urgent. She told the operator it sounded like her late husband's voice, although he had passed away more than a year earlier. At first, I thought it might be hallucinatory, someone calling into the night, playing a cruel prank on someone who lived alone. But when I arrived, the porch light was on, and Mrs. Foley stood in her bathrobe at the doorway, shaking like she'd swallowed a fistful of ice. Her hair, once thick and auburn, was now a thin halo of gray. She greeted me with teary eyes. "He called my name," she said, just outside my bedroom window. The wind was too still for a breeze to push his voice in through the cracks. Her hands trembled as she stood in the glow of my flashlight. She guided me inside and pointed at the closed bedroom window. There, the lace curtain hung still in the darkness, and the sill was damp with condensation from the cold air outside. I ran my gloved hand along the frame, feeling for signs of tampering. There weren't any. No fingerprint smudges, no scrape marks on the wood. But on the ground outside the window, faint impressions in the dew, were footprints, too large to be hers. They trailed from the side yard, circled the house, and disappeared into a row of willow trees at the property line. I called for backup and told Mrs. Foley to remain inside with the doors locked. I stayed on the porch, scanning the lawn, radio in one hand, flashlight in the other. The hum of the street lamp overhead buzzed so loudly I could almost hear my own pulse in time with its flicker. I looked toward the edge of the property, where shadows pooled beneath the willow branches. My breath fogged the beam of light as I tried to pierce the darkness. After 10 minutes of staring into those murky depths, I heard a faint rustle, like someone stepping on dry leaves, though the ground was carpeted with wet grass. I swung my light toward the sound, but there was nothing. My stomach clenched. The last time I had felt that knot of dread was on a call in Indiana, 5 years earlier, when 3 elderly women within the same zip code had reported someone whispering their names around midnight. We never found who it was back then. I thought closing my eyes tight might erase the memory. An uneasy flashback of late-night surveillance logs and half-formed clues. But once it starts, it burrows in, like a seed planted too deep to pull out. Lieutenant Hayes pulled up in the cruiser at 2:55. I waved him down. "We got footprints rustling from the trees, but no sign of anyone," I said. He nodded, his face drawn in shadow under the brim of his patrol cap. "We'll set a perimeter. Get some officers out here to watch the exits. Nobody moves in or out without checking in." He slid out of the car, and I saw the fatigue in his eyes, the same exhaustion that weighed on me. He was a good man, had been a detective before he took the lieutenant's post. Now he mostly handled paperwork, but on nights like this he still came out when things felt off. I watched as he directed other units to take positions across the street, at the corner and near the gas station, their headlights masking their outlines like moths drawn to a flame. The hum of radios filled the air with static, and every chirp of a call from dispatch felt like a heartbeat echoing in the night. By 3:20, we'd canvassed the perimeter twice. No sign of intruders, no voices, no lights, no movement. Mrs. Foley clung to her cat, whispering that she remembered her husband's voice nearly perfectly. Deep, warm, California twang. Just like when he used to laugh. The forensic techs arrived at 4:10. I watched them photograph the footprints, their flashbulbs popping flares of light that illuminated the dew on the lawn in stark contrast, making every blade of grass look like a blade of metal under a microscope. After they left, I stayed for another hour, parked in the cruiser, lights off, watching Mrs. Foley's silhouette at the window. She peered out until sleep dragged her eyelids down. I remember that look. Equal parts terror and longing, as if she half expected to see him standing there, backlit by the streetlight, waiting to walk her to bed one last time. The call that night felt like a fluke, but a fluke with fingerprints on it. I went home at dawn, but the image of those footprints stayed in my dreams, looming, pale shapes moving away from me into the trees, dissolving into darkness. I woke in a sweat, brushed crumbs of pillow from my face, and tried to convince myself it was just a prowler looking to scare an old lady. I told myself it ended there. But the next night, another call came in. At 2:48 a.m. on March 19th, I got dispatched to a solitary home in the Parkview subdivision. A man named Arthur Delgado, 62, lived alone in a ranch-style house behind an old brick church. He'd called 911, saying he heard someone whispering, "Arthur," through the vent in his attic. He sounded frantic, his voice tight with fear, like he'd been running in circles around his bedroom for minutes before dialing. By the time I arrived, Delgado was on the porch, coat clutched around him, peering up at the roof. He told me he'd gone to bed around 10 and had woken up at around 2:30 when he heard creaking floorboards overhead. At first, he thought it might be squirrels, but then he heard his name. He said it was low and slow, almost dragging. Arthur. He swore it sounded like the neighbor's kid Taylor, imitating his voice, but Taylor didn't live anywhere near that part of the house, and he had been at his own home, 15 miles away, according to his parents. I didn't doubt Delgado's sincerity. His eyes were bright with fear, and I could see his hands shaking in front of him. He led me inside, where dim moonlight spilled through the blinds onto hardwood floors. I could still see scuff marks from his bare feet, leading from the doorway to the staircase where the steps creaked like a loose hinge. Upstairs, I found nothing. No footprints in the attic, no pry marks on the trapdoor. But when I went back downstairs, Delgado pointed at the living room vent near the ceiling. "That's where I heard it," he whispered. I kept my flashlight trained on the vent while Delgado stayed by the hallway, his shoulders hunched, as if bracing for someone to step out of the shadows at any moment. I left Delgado in the care of a friend who lived a few streets over and drove back to the station. That night, I logged the details and thought about the Foley call. 2 incidents in 2 nights, both elderly victims. both followed by footprints that led nowhere. I realized that if there was a pattern, I needed to find it fast. I dug into their records, and both Foley and Delgado had spent time in the hospital 3 months earlier, on the same floor, under the care of a nurse named Marlon Reyes. He had worked at Cedar Creek Medical Center before transferring here last fall. I'd heard nothing out of the ordinary about him. Clean background check, no disciplinary actions, good reviews from supervisors. But something clicked. If Reyes had compiled sensitive details on recoveries, addresses, family situations, maybe he'd pieced together who lived alone. The thought made my stomach churn. The next couple of nights passed without incident. On the third night, I went out on routine patrol, driving past the gas station at the corner of Forest Avenue. The neon pump lights were turned off, and only a single floodlight hung over the convenience store door, glowing like a dim warning beacon. My cruiser's headlights glinted off the pavement, highlighting every crack and seam in the asphalt. I took solace in the mundanity of the call. Inventory check at the 24-hour diner, noise complaint at a backyard party on Crestwood Road. Anything to avoid sitting in a dark house awake, replaying the same fears. By 4:30 a.m., I was back at the station, drafting a preliminary memo about Reyes. I requested a no-knock warrant for his apartment on Elm Street. We executed the search on March the 23rd at 5:15 a.m., just as the sky was beginning to lighten. His unit was neat, almost sterile, with oatmeal-colored walls and minimal furnishings. What caught my eye first was the small bulletin board above his desk. It had pictures of his high school friends from 20 years ago, but under those, pinned with red-headed tacks, were index cards with patient names: C. Foley, A. Delgado, M. Carlton, and so on. Next to each name was an address, dates of discharge, notes like lives alone, no family visits, weak gait, medication, OxyContin. I knelt and ran my finger over the cards, feeling my pulse quicken. In his dresser drawer, I found a black spiral notebook filled with patient details, notes that went beyond medical necessity, like window facing south, good vantage, pond nearby, could hide if chased. He even recorded whether their homes had security alarms. The most chilling entry was for Mrs. Foley. February 15th, 12. Mrs. Foley, cat, quiet house, veranda, light on 10 p.m. Will be here March 18th, 2012, 2:30 a.m. My stomach turned as I realized Reyes had scheduled his visits. Foley on the 18th, Delgado on the 19th, and likely others in the coming nights. During his interrogation, Reyes sat slumped in the chair, his eyes hollow, like he'd been awake for days. He confessed without hesitation he'd become obsessively curious about his old patients, especially the ones no one seemed to care about. Once he had the discharge lists, he mapped their addresses, noting how many days had passed since they left the hospital. He figured that after 3 months, they'd be settled into routines, trusting they were safe. He'd first tested his method in Wisconsin, then Indiana, before transferring here. He said hearing their names whispered from the shadows made his heart race, like playing God, deciding whether they would answer or freeze in fear. When they did answer, confused or terrified, he got something akin to permission, a tacit acknowledgement that they still believed he was there to help, not harm. I remember escorting him out of his apartment in handcuffs. Didn't resist. He looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "It was too easy. They never suspected the nurse." His voice was flat, devoid of empathy. The uniform I'd worn for nearly 2 decades felt heavier that morning, as if it carried every misstep I'd made, every call I'd dismissed too quickly, every off-the-cuff remark about old folks hearing things. He'd used our complacency against us, manipulating the one person arguably most capable of checking on these vulnerable patients. And he had done it in plain sight. Back at the station, I filed the report, noting every detail, the timeline, the index cards, Reyes's confessions. By late afternoon, the story was already making headlines. Nurse accused of preying on elderly patients. But as far as the department was concerned, the work was far from over. We still had to notify families, gather evidence from the homes he'd targeted, and reevaluate every elderly patient discharged from Cedar Creek after September 2011. I spent the next several days coordinating with social services, checking on survivors, making sure caregivers and neighbors were aware. I drove by the Foley and Delgado houses every night, and I would catch myself stopping the car, staring at dark windows, wondering if anyone was out there listening for their name. Over the following week, I discovered that Reyes had planned hits on 3 more households. One was a lonely widower, a retired mechanic who'd been in for a routine hip replacement. Another was a former schoolteacher with early-stage Parkinson's who lived in a ranch home off Meadow Lane. A third was a retired high school principal, 85 years old, known for his involvement in local charities. All were on Reyes's list, with dates penciled next to their names that hadn't arrived yet. We checked those homes and found footprints, shallow depressions in the lawn edging toward windows, but no one was home at the time he'd come calling. All of them had families who visited regularly, thwarting Reyes's attempts. It was a small mercy. I still felt the weight of each call. When the wind howled down Elmwood Drive at 2:30 a.m., I'd lie in bed listening to it, my chest tight, replaying every detail. I heard my own name murmured in that gust, as though the wind itself had joined Reyes's twisted chorus. Sometimes I imagined Reyes standing there in the dark, watching me, as if testing to see if I'd answer, even though I knew better than to open the door for a whisper. The torment wasn't in the violence, but in the vulnerability. Knowing that the tool of healing, a nurse's uniform, could be a mask for something far darker. After Reyes was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of attempted murder, I transferred to a different division. The lieutenant thought it best for me to take a break from the night shift. I spent a few months training new recruits on elder care protocols and advising them on how to spot patterns in seemingly harmless calls. I'd tell them, don't be afraid to take that gut feeling seriously. A whisper in the dark could be the reason you catch a predator before he finishes his work. Some of the recruits nodded, wide-eyed, as though hearing about a phantom stalking the elderly in their sleep. But the truth was far worse. The wolf had worn a blue scrub shirt, and he'd been invited inside. A year later, I found myself driving solo through the outskirts of Bridgewater, Indiana, on a routine traffic stop. It was 2:53 a.m., and the radio was quiet. I pulled over a car with a headlight out, but as I approached the driver's side window, I heard a low voice call my name, clear as day, from the front porch of a nearby house. My name. Officer Thompson, Officer Thompson. I froze in place, hand on my holster, flashlight trembling between my fingers. My heart pounded so loud I feared the driver in the car would hear it. I turned slowly toward the house, a single-story brick ranch with its security light half glowing, too dim to show faces, but bright enough to make me squint. The door was cracked open. No one stood on the porch. The house was silent, but headlights from my cruiser reflected off the vinyl siding, casting long shadows in the yard. I took an involuntary step backward, fumbling for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. We need backup. I'm getting a suspicious call. Someone's calling my name." Dispatch replied with the usual stuff. "Break on district traffic," but I cut them off. "No, I mean someone's doing exactly that. Heard it here at this location. I said, pointing my flashlight at the house. My voice cracked as I spoke, betraying the fear that coiled in my chest. I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cold. My mind raced back to those nights in Millhaven. I remembered the breaks in the routine, the way Reyes had once moved through shadows, slipping in because no one expected the enemy to stand in scrubs. Just as quickly, I shook off the memory and focused on the now, the door on that porch. I flicked on my patrol spotlight, bathing the house in harsh white light. Still, no one there. Backup arrived 4 minutes later, with Lieutenant Hayes, just as tired but still sharp. He and 2 other officers spread out, clearing the yard, checking doors and windows. We found no footprints on the sidewalk, no pry marks on the doors, nothing to suggest someone had entered. When Hayes shined his light into the front window, he saw the coffee table was set with a half-finished cup of black coffee and a dog-eared mystery novel. The living room lamp flickered on and off, as if the house itself were alive, breathing. I watched Hayes knock on the door with his baton. "Police! Open up!" No response. He leaned in. "Sir, ma'am, come out with your hands up." We heard nothing but the hum of the spotlight and the distant rumble of traffic on the interstate. I felt the hair on my neck stand on end. "Is someone inside?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Hayes shook his head. He tried the doorknob, locked. He signaled me to stand by as he tapped his boot against the door, ready to breach. We counted silently. 1, 2, 3, then kicked it in. The door swung open and the lamp shut off, plunging us into darkness. My eyes adjusted to the faint glow of the security light outside. The coffee was still warm. The book lay open at page 77, spine cracked. No footprints in the hallway, no whispers in the vents. Only the echo of our boots on the hardwood floor, like distant footsteps in an empty hallway. We cleared the house in minutes. Every closet, every crawl space, every bathroom was empty. Hayes radioed all clear, and we stood in the living room, the tension crackling like a live wire between us. I noticed a family photo on the mantel, a woman, a child, a golden retriever, smiling faces, frozen in happier days. I flicked my flashlight on, shining on the frame. The final chill shot through me was knowing there should have been someone, anyone, calling my name. But there wasn't. The source had vanished, as though it had been nothing more than a broken record repeating my name from the blackness. That incident never made the papers. The family moved out a week later, leaving the house boarded up. Some of the old-timers in town swore it was haunted. Others claimed kids were sneaking in to get a laugh by mimicking the cops. But I knew better. Whatever, or whoever it was, it had recognized me. It had known my name before I even stepped out of the cruiser, and whoever, or whatever, it was still out there. When I moved to a day shift assignment later that year, I kept driving by the boarded-up house every so often. In daylight, it looked unremarkable. Paint peeling off the siding, the lawn overgrown, the single window left ajar like a slack jaw begging to speak. No footprints appeared at night. No voices echoed through the rooms. But on the nights I worked the later swing shift, I sometimes smelled coffee brewing. I'd catch a whiff near the house, bitter, stale, but unmistakably fresh. And every time I passed, a tiny voice in my head whispered, "Officer Thompson," as if waiting to see if I'd answer. The final time I went back, it was early October, almost a year since the first calls. There was a cold rain falling, the kind that soaked through a jacket in minutes. I parked on the street and stared at the house. The boards on the windows had rotted away, leaving jagged gaps. I clicked my flashlight on, pointed it at the front door. The boards had been removed. Wet footprints led from the curb, across the threshold, and vanished on the living room carpet. I raised my radio, but my throat was dry, and my voice wouldn't come. I took a shaky breath, stepped off the curb, and followed the prints inside. The coffee table was there, stained with old rings from mugs long gone. The book lay open where it always had, but the page turned to 113 now, marked with a small brass paperclip. I knelt and read a line. He waited in the dark, knowing she would call. I felt the floorboards creak behind me as though someone was pacing, waiting. My flashlight beam trembled across the room, catching the dusty mirror that hung above the mantel. In the reflection, I saw a figure in scrubs standing just beyond the light's reach. My name slipped from my lips in a gasp. Marlin. The figure turned, but the flash of recognition in those hollow eyes was gone. Only darkness. In that moment, I finally understood. The predator I'd caught was only a shadow of something older, something that fed on fear itself. And as the rain tapped at the window panes and my heart pounded in my ears, I realized I had followed the whispers here, into a trap I couldn't leave. The bathroom door slammed shut behind me. The hallway light snapped off. My flashlight sputtered and died. I stood alone, listening to the drip of water from the ceiling and the faint sound of someone, maybe my own breathing, whisper my name again. Thompson. The board beneath my boot collapsed with a splintering crack, and for a heartbeat I felt weightless, tumbling backward into darkness as splinters bit into my palms. The flashlight skidded across warped floorboards and clattered against the mantel, its beam sputtering until nothing remained but a faint gray smudge of dying light. I landed on my back, heart pounding so hard I thought the ribs might shatter. Rain dripped onto my face, cold as guilt. I lay there, breath ragged, listening to my own panicked inhalations, each one loud, urgent, a promise of panic bursting through my chest. The hallway door was still shut behind me. I could hear nothing beyond the hush of rain on the roof, save the faintest echo of my own name. Thompson. It felt like a plea and a threat both, underscored by a soft scratching sound high above, where the attic lay. I didn't have time to register terror before I scrambled to my feet, fingertips brushing dust and clutter, an old newspaper clipping, a brittle page from a phone book, a stained coffee filter discarded near the hearth. Every step made a groan that threatened to give me away. I pressed my back against a wall, knuckles white, and forced myself to look up the hallway toward the staircase. The flimsy glow from the security light outside seeped through a crack near the floorboards, painting the hallway in murky swirls of dim gray. I fought for control over my breathing, inhaling through my nose and exhaling through tight lips. I inched forward, one hand grazing the peeling wallpaper, the other resting on my holster, though my service weapon felt useless without light. The house groaned as if it had a life force of its own, settling its bones in the settling night. I'd been a cop long enough to know that silence breeds paranoia. Every small creak might be a footstep just out of sight. Every gust of wind could mask a predatory whisper. My hair felt coated in goosebumps. I forced my eyes to the floor, searching for footprints, but the plush carpet had swallowed any trace. As I stepped across the threshold to the staircase, I realized that I was fighting not just a physical trap, but the memories that had stalked me for years. Cases I couldn't close, calls I'd dismissed, an echo of helplessness I never wanted to feel again. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, hands outstretched, seeking a door handle. On the second floor, the which door? I wasn't sure. My map of this place was fragmented. The hallway was narrow. Old light bulbs swung from frayed cords on the ceiling, but none were lit. The only illumination came from the window at the far end, where sheets clung to broken curtain rods, I smelled mildew, nicotine stains, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. The air choked me for a second. I swallowed, stifling a cough, and moved forward, each step a trapdoor beneath my focus. At the end of the hallway was a bedroom door cracked open an inch, pale lamplight flickering inside. I recognized the wallpaper from the photo in the living room. It was the master bedroom. I dove through the gap, kicking my shoulder into the frame, and felt the door slam behind me with a finality that rattled my spine. Inside, a nightstand lamp flickered, tossing light onto patient charts spread across a dresser. I recognized Reyes's scrawl. March 24th, 12, Mr. Thompson, celeb police, known face, higher risk. My stomach plummeted. My own name, scrawled alongside notes about my reputation, my routines. I flipped the chart over and saw another index card pinned beneath it. March 25th, 12, stay. My blood turned to ice. The room felt smaller, constricting me like a noose. On the bed was a syringe, empty, but still sticky with a faint sheen of residue. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it. What was he planning? Why here? Why now? A low, rasping sound came from the corner of the room. I spun, firearm raised, but the beam of my dying flashlight found only shadows. Then I heard something scrape against plaster. Soft, like fingernails dragging along a wall. My gut tightened, and I realized I had stepped onto fresh debris from a hole punched in the plasterboard. A gap opened into the attic. 2 feet of jagged rotting cedar patched poorly. The attic loomed above, at a right angle to the roofline, pitch black, except for the dust motes drifting down like motes of death. I knew attic spaces. I'd searched them on hundreds of calls. If he was watching me, he'd lit this lamp to draw me here. But I couldn't just stand there. I sucked in air, steeled myself, and began to shimmy upward into the attic crawlspace. My left knee crunched on a broken rafter, and I swore silently, pressing further until my chest cleared the opening. The attic air was dry, thick with the smell of rot, insulation itching at my uniform. The only sound beyond my ragged breathing was the slow creak of the boards as I shifted. I panicked when I saw footprints, narrow, lace-up boots, plastered in sawdust along a narrow beam. They led to the opposite end of the attic, where an old window, boarded from the outside, had a narrow gap letting in a shaft of gray-white light. I knelt and peered through. Rain fell in slanted sheets against a sky as black as a bruise. From this angle, I could see the roof's pitch, the gutter, and beyond that, the ground more than 10 feet below. Then I heard a soft clatter behind me. Tools, maybe, dropping to the floor. I spun, but in the gloom I saw nothing except rows of dusty boxes and rafters reaching back into obscurity. My heart hammered. I realized whichever way I went would lead me deeper into the predator's lair. The only sense of safety lay back below, but the gap there was only the width of my chest. I climbed backward toward it, my gloved hand slipping on old shards of insulation. As soon as my feet touched the edge of the opening, I shoved down. I tumbled and rolled through the bedroom doorway, crashing onto my side with a grunt. I lay there for a second, chest heaving, blood pounding in my ears. Then I returned my grip to the syringe on the nightstand and, with shaking hands, slid off its cap. My instincts screamed at me not to get any closer to that indentured darkness, but I couldn't leave without being sure. I rose slowly and moved back toward the door, only to find it locked. My hand dove to my belt, but my cuffs were missing. I swore again. He'd been inside, had to have disarmed me during the struggle, taking cuffs I'd unholstered as soon as I hit the living room floor. It was textbook. Remove the weapon, take the restraints, isolate the target. I pressed my back against the door and stared at the syringe. Morphine? Fentanyl? If he used the same tactics as before, he'd inject a lethal dose, silently, clinically. I forced myself to breathe, closing my eyes, thinking of Christmas dinners with my daughter, her laughing up at me from the table, then snapping open my eyes to face reality. The hallway behind the bedroom door grew silent, but I knew he was out there, listening to every breath I took. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed down the sound, reminding myself that panic would only invite a bullet or a syringe to the neck. I had to keep my wits. I rifled the nightstand drawers. Empty, save for an old packet of cough drops. My flashlight lay in the corner, now dead. Darkness pressed in, as tangible as water. I would have to navigate by memory if I wanted out. I shoved the syringe into my back pocket and patted the walls, stepping back until my hand found a light switch. Nothing. I cursed under my breath. A trick Martinez taught all rookies. Always check for a fuse box. I yanked open a closet door and found a breaker panel. The switches were labeled bedroom, living room, and something smudged. Attic? I flipped them all down. All at once, the house went dark. Only the rattling storm outside gave sound. I listened, and from somewhere behind me, I heard the faintest sound of leather creaking as a boot pivoted. I drew a steady breath and burst from the closet, tackling the door as if knocking it off its hinges. It gave way with a crack that seemed to echo into infinity. I bolted down the hallway, right turn at the top of the stairs, then left. I flew down the stairs 2 at a time, colliding with the living room rug and sliding across it. I landed chest first with a thud, teeth rattling. My palms slid across the splintered wood and I rolled to a crouch as adrenaline ignited my senses. The front door was just ahead. I leapt to my feet and yanked it open, rain lashing into my face. I sprinted across the narrow front walkway, boots slipping on wet concrete, past the overgrown shrubs and across the threshold to 5th Street. My radio lay discarded at the driveway's edge. I scooped it up and hit the transmit button. This is Unit 24. Emergency. We're at 4 Elm Street. Suspect in the house. I'm out. I'm clear of the house now, sending all units to secure. Dispatch's voice came through garbled, but I could hear, copy, backup en route. I pressed my back against a patrol car's hood. Rain soaked into my uniform, chilled me to the bone. Sirens cut through the night within seconds, and I watched headlights carve arcs through the darkness as 2 cruisers and an ambulance screeched to a halt. I waved them off. "No medics, I'm okay," I said, but my voice shook. Lieutenant Hayes jumped out of the cruiser, eyes wide, scanning my face. "Thompson, report!" he barked, already keying his mic. I swallowed, throat raw. He trapped me, tried to sedate me. He set the breaker. I had to jump out the window. I don't know if he's still inside. Hayes shoved me aside, ran to the front door, and let 2 officers pass him. They rushed in with shotguns raised, sweeping rooms methodically. I watched the last one turn the corner, then I tore off my soaked jacket, slapped it over my chest to trap whatever warmth remained. Nearly 15 minutes passed before they emerged. Guns still raised, faces grim. They said they didn't find anyone. No trace of a forced exit, no blood, no signs. The attic trap, he'd slipped out a back window onto an awning above a connecting garage roof, then ducked into an alley before we arrived. I felt cold all over. Hayes led me to his cruiser. "Get out of those wet clothes," he ordered. "Get to the ER, get warmed up." I tried to argue, but I knew I was half frozen and half sapped by shock. I sat in the back seat, dislodged blade of adrenaline still trembling in my bones. As the ambulance cleared, I caught sight of the Foley and Delgado houses in the rearview mirror, dark and silent, as though nothing had happened. The hospital was 2 miles away. I was barely conscious as paramedics peeled off my soaked shirt, replacing it with a damp paper gown. They took vitals, eventually baseline, told me I'd avoided hypothermia. My hands still shook. A nurse wrapped me in blankets and handed me a sacrificial cup of hot coffee. I shot them a tired, grateful nod. They left me in a tiny room with plastic curtains drawn. Hayes entered a few minutes later, stomping in with a cardboard box. In it were Reyes's scrubs, his files, patient charts, evidence the techs had collected. He dumped them onto a nearby bed. "Look through these," he said, voice low. "See if you can find patterns. Anything that pins him here." I sat up straighter, heart thrumming against my ribs. I leafed through pages. Each chart, names scribbled, dates, handwritten arrows connecting discharges to planned visits. He'd been tracking me long before I'd stepped foot in his apartment. My uniform number, my beat schedule, personal notes, solitary, no backup if alone. Rage and relief mixed in my chest. Rage that I'd nearly died. Relief that he'd missed. Hayes watched me sort papers into piles. Victims, targets, dates not arrived, escape routes. He asked, "You okay?" I forced a nod. "I'm fine. Just got to finish this." My mind churned. He'd planned further hits, on witnesses at a fundraiser for the local nursing home, on a church volunteer I knew by name, all laid out in a timeline that ended 6 weeks from now. I closed my fist around a dog-eared index card, reading the scrawl. April 30th, 12, Town Hall, Councilwoman Pat Shelton, Weak Support Networks. My throat burned. The house had been a trap, his last attempt to silence me. I wondered how many other off-duty cops he'd studied, what file contained my face before he started marking dates. Within 2 days, we had a warrant to search his remaining properties. A storage unit, his parents' home in Cedarville, a vacant second home in Ridgewood. Each location gave us more evidence, more index cards, more photos, slides of windows circled with red ink, maps with dotted lines showing footpaths. We even found a burner phone he used to call victims before showing up at their houses. Deep-faked voice recordings of loved ones saying, "You know who it is, let me in." Every time I listened to those recordings, fury and a new kind of dread churned inside me. I felt as though I were chasing a phantom through an endless alley, hearing my own name wrenched from my lips and thrown back at me like a curse. Secretly, I'd started keeping a file of my own. Compiled letters from colleagues, memos, dispatch logs, anything that might show where I'd been, when. I set traps of my own. Lone nighttime ride-alongs with a training officer. Random reroutes from my usual patrol path. At home, I installed a new set of deadbolts and a ring of motion sensors around my porch. Every creak on the floor felt like an assault on my nerves. Every wind gust sounded like a whisper. I couldn't sleep without leaving a radio on at low volume, broadcasting the local news. Anything to break the silence. My daughter, 10 years old then, said I was paranoid, but I knew better. I could still feel the weight of his gaze sliding over me as I sat in that attic. He'd studied how I moved, where I went, what made me vulnerable. The truth was, he could be anywhere, even now. A month later, we learned Reyes had managed to slip out of the state. He'd used a patient's transport van, one scheduled to take elderly residents to dialysis appointments, to drive across state lines. My stomach hit the floor when they told me. He'd been registered as part-time caregiver on paperwork, simply walked away with the keys. It took a week for the feds to track him to a deserted farmhouse outside Muskogee, Oklahoma. By then, he'd already tried to carry out a hit on a witness from Cedarville. a retired school counselor. The sheriff's deputies found him holding a stethoscope, standing in the witness's living room, whispering her name in a children's lullaby. He was arrested without incident. He smiled at the deputies, unafraid, saying he would have waited until morning if necessary. He was extradited back to Iowa, and I sat at the front row of the courtroom when they read his sentence, life without parole. Watching him remain calm, showing no sign of remorse, made bile rise in my throat. His lips curled into that same flat, satisfied smirk I'd seen in the mirror inside the boarded-up house. That night, I couldn't eat. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the house completely silent. My uniform hung in the closet like a memorial. I wondered if the silence was worse than any whisper. But time moved on. I took a desk job in the homicide unit, shaking my hands until they ceased trembling. I counseled younger officers about cases that get under your skin, about paranoia that sometimes becomes self-fulfilling. The department commended me for uncovering Reyes's network and preventing further deaths. I went back to that boarded-up house once, during the height of summer. The boards were splintered and the window gaps mended. Someone had removed the syringe and charts. I assumed during the cleanup. I pressed my hand against the rotted wood paneling on the front door. My fingertips traced a name scratched into the wood. Thompson. Underneath, scratched deeper. I'm still here. Rain began to fall. A sudden summer storm. I stepped back and kept walking. My reflection in a passing pawnshop window rippled with rain, and for a second, I saw that figure in the darkness once more. Eyes hollow, watching. I shook my head, blinked, and he was gone. But as the thunder rolled across the sky, I realized that trauma had no final scene. The whispers had once led me into that trap. They had nearly killed me. Even now, every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the faintest echo of my own name, drifting through darkness, as if someone, something, was reminding me that it was still out there. And the deepest fear I carried was not of the man who hid behind a nurse's mask, nor the lonely house in Millhaven, nor the boarded-up shell on 5th Street. The final terror was that in the end, fate might deliver me back to that attic, back to the darkness, and I would still hear a whisper calling me, turning my own name into an instrument of dread that I could never unlearn. I sometimes dream I'm back on that night in October. Rain drumming on the boarded-up windows, the echo of hollow footsteps following me down the hallway. Even after I moved off the night shift and changed assignments, those dreams never stopped. The boards splintering, the feel of splinters digging into my skin as I fell through that rotten floor. And every time I wake, I check the clock, 3:02 a.m. or 2:53 a.m., always somewhere past midnight, when the world is still, and every whisper of wind sounds like a voice calling my name. It's been almost 2 years now, and I still find myself glancing over my shoulder on quiet streets, hyper-aware of any sound that could be a footstep. Some nights, I lie on my back in the dark, listening to the house settle. The windows rattle in the frames, shifting shadows across the ceiling, and I imagine them forming shapes. Outlines of a man in scrubs standing at the foot of my bed, staring with hollow eyes, mouth moving soundlessly as though whispering my name between clenched teeth. I thought I'd outrun the fear. I transferred to the homicide division, working mostly daytime hours. By day, I felt safe, distance from the darkness. But about 6 weeks ago, a dispatch call came in from a small town up near the state line, Spencer's Mill, population roughly 800, with a single four-way stop and one traffic signal that only turned red when a train rolled through. It was 12:17 a.m. when the call came in. An 18-year-old girl, Sarah Lawson, said she'd been driving home from her shift at the diner when she heard someone whisper her name through her open driver's side window. The whisper was soft, breathy, repeated. "Sarah, Sarah." She slammed on the brakes of her old Mercury Sable, rolled the windows up, and locked the doors. She called 911, hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She told dispatch she thought someone was in the passenger seat. She flicked her brights on and off, hoping a car behind her would shine its lights inside. When she realized she was alone on that stretch of highway, no houses, no street lamps, she turned around and headed back toward town with the radio blaring. She parked at the Shady Rest Motel and called us from the lobby. The dispatcher sent me and Officer Garcia, and by the time we arrived, Sarah was pale and shaking, wearing her diner uniform and clutching a small purse as if it were a lifeline. I found Sarah in the lobby, sitting on a worn vinyl couch beneath a flickering neon sign that read "Vacancy," but kept blinking off as though someone was playing a cruel joke. She told me the voice sounded exactly like her mother's, a warm Midwestern drawl 2 octaves lower, the lullaby cadence of bedtime stories. The difference was that Sarah's mother was at home, in bed, sleeping, according to the call Sarah had made 15 minutes earlier. We walked outside together. The March air was still damp, but the temperature hovered just above freezing. The road was empty, the highway as silent as a coffin. The headlights of my cruiser illuminated the white lines on the asphalt, and I caught my reflection in the windshield. Bleary-eyed, unshaven, wearing a uniform much too big for me, as if I'd grown too small inside it. Sarah pointed to the driver's side window. It was rolled up, frost forming along the edges, but inside, her jacket lay unfolded across the passenger seat, as though someone had just dropped it there in a hurry. We ran our flashlights over the interior. No footprints in the floor mat. No fingerprints on the door handle. Nothing but the jacket, which wasn't hers. Even the fabric looked unfamiliar. High-end leather, the kind of jacket that could cost more than her monthly car payment. I radioed for bagging crews. Evidence techs arrived within 20 minutes. They dusted for prints, ran tests on the fabric, nothing conclusive. While they worked, Officer Garcia and I took Sarah back to the station. She sat in the front seat as I drove, her knuckles white around the steering wheel seatbelt, eyes wide with what looked like terror and confusion in equal measure. She told me that when she first heard her name, she thought it was the radio. DJ reading off a birthday subset or a call-in request. But the radio had been off, tuned to an oldies station that played only instrumental tracks. She waited for the announcer to start talking again, but instead heard the whisper through the open window. "Sarah, Sarah." And then the distinct click of a glove against glass, like someone testing to see if the window was latched. She slammed it before her foot hit the brake. I couldn't shake the memory of that. Someone testing the window, making sure it was locked. I'd heard that move before. On the Foley case, on the Delgado call when Reyes was scribbling pages of notes in his apartment. He was meticulous. He tested entry points, studied routines, waited for the moment of vulnerability. At the station, Sarah walked into the booking room, stood by the blank wall as the techs processed her. She was polite, composed outwardly, though I could see her fingers trembling. She told me she didn't want her parents notified. She lived alone since her father died 2 years ago. She said she preferred to go home and just make sure the doors are locked. She looked at me and added, "I want to sleep in my own bed." I wanted to tell her everything I knew. About the calls in Millhaven, the boarded-up house, Reyes's escape, the whispers that followed me even now. But she was 800 miles from Millhaven, and I didn't want to freak her out. I tried to reassure her. "We'll have extra patrols out tonight. If anything happens, call us right away." She nodded stiffly, gave me a weak smile, and left on her own. I watched her cross the parking lot, the neon light glinting off her eyes, reflecting a fear I couldn't unpack in that moment. Fear of that voice, fear of a predator who said your name like an invitation. I thought of Reyes's words. I wanted them to answer, to feel safe letting me in. I asked Officer Garcia to drop me off at the house where I was staying, my brother's place in Spencer's Mill. He'd moved here a few years back and rented a small ranch house 2 blocks from the diner where Sarah worked. I unlocked the door with a key he'd left under the mat and stepped inside. Everything smelled like his detergent, flowery, almost cloying. I flicked on the kitchen light and balanced the evidence bag on the counter. Inside was that leather jacket. I reached in and unzipped an inner pocket. Nothing but lint and a sprinkling of moisture. I closed the bag and tucked it under my arm. In the living room, I sat on the couch, propped the bag on the coffee table, and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, head in my hands. The overhead light was harsh, fluorescent, making the room feel smaller than it really was. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but each intake felt too sharp, too hot. The memory of the attic, the smell of rot, the weight of the boards under my boots, rushed back, drowning me in cold sweat. A low knock came at the door. I looked up. My brother Josh stood there in his bathrobe, hair mussed, coffee mug in hand. He took a step back, hand pressed to his chest when he saw my face. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was half asleep. I ran a hand through my hair, pressed a thumb into my forehead. "Yeah," I lied. "Just, girl heard something in her car. Came from town." He nodded, set the coffee on the side table, and sat beside me. "She okay?" I stared at the jacket in my lap. "I don't know." He didn't say anything. We sat for a moment. The only sound the hum of the refrigerator and a faint rattling of the house settling. "You should sleep," he said at last. "You look like hell." I stood and slid the jacket into a closet. "I'll crash in the guest room." He stood and grabbed my shoulder for a brief moment, hard enough to let me know he cared, soft enough not to hurt. I nodded, walked down the hallway, and turned on the light in the spare bedroom. Everything was the same as I'd left it a month ago. Dust motes, an array of sunlight that streamed between the curtains, a baseball cap on the dresser, a stack of magazines on the nightstand. I lay on the bed, eyes on the ceiling. I tried counting backwards from 100, but my mind wouldn't settle. I pictured Sarah stranded on that highway, alone in the dark, hearing that voice. And I pictured myself there, my own name hissed through the night, helpless to save her. 4 hours later, I jolted awake to the sound of wind rattling the screen door, banging it against the frame. I strained to hear footsteps on the porch or someone whisper my name, but the wind was the only sound. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was 6:34 a.m., a text from the station. "Officer Ingram to speak with you. ASAP." I slid out of bed, wrapped a blanket around me, and grabbed my phone. There was no voicemail, but he'd left a callback number. I dialed it, voice tight. "Ingram?" "Sergeant Ingram," he replied, voice weary. "Listen, I don't know how to tell you this, but Sarah was found this morning." My heart sank. My stomach knotted. "Found where?" "At the edge of Silver Creek. She'd driven her car down the side of a ravine. It looked like she lost control. Maybe fell asleep at the wheel. Her body was in the water." He paused, and I heard muffled voices in the background. I exhaled raggedly, vision blurring. "Was she alive?" "She died on impact. No signs of struggle. They think she turned too fast heading into that turn." My vision tunneled. "Did she say anything else before?" He cut me off. "No, she called again last night. Said she thought she heard her name coming from the back seat. She waited for you to get there before she left. She didn't want to drive until the patrol arrived." He exhaled. "I'm sorry." The line went dead. I sank to the floor, leaning against the foot of the bed, blanket pooling around me. I replayed her words. I thought I heard my mother's voice. If she believed it was a prank or something fixable, she wouldn't have panicked. But then, hearing your own name called in a voice you trust can be worse than any physical danger. She thought she could hold out until help arrived. Until I arrived. She believed my promise. I slid my phone into my pocket, shoved back the covers, and stood. I grabbed my shoes and badge from the dresser, pulled on socks and boots, and left the house without a word to my brother. When I reached my cruiser, the sun was rising, a pale orange light washing over the town. The highway to the diner was empty, save for one truck's headlights drifting east. I climbed in, tightened the seatbelt, and headed toward Silver Creek Road. The creek was low after weeks without rain. I found her car at the bottom of a shallow ravine, crumpled against the bank, windows shattered. Her purse was on the passenger seat untouched. I walked the perimeter, no footprints, no tire skid marks on the road. It was too early, frost still dotted the highway lines. Yet her car had somehow turned, gone off the edge, as if steered by something else. The ravine was no more than 20 feet deep. If Sarah had fallen asleep, she might have drifted off, but witnesses said she was alert and drove carefully. She didn't make that turn at speed. I climbed down, kicked at the muddy ground for prints. My flashlight revealed a single set. A pair of lace-up boots, matching the ones I saw in Reyes's attic. They pressed into the damp soil, leading away from the car and across the creek, toward a stand of pine trees. The prints disappeared near a fallen log where slim, dark sticks lay broken. Branches snapped from the weight of a hurried step. I knew in that moment that Sarah hadn't fallen asleep. She'd chased the whisper, drawn by the sound of her name, thinking she could confront it, keep it at bay long enough to prove it was nothing. But she was too slow. I called for backup and held the evidence tape at the edge while the crime scene techs combed the wreckage. I watched them bag Sarah's locket, now cracked in two by impact. Crouching, I searched the mud near the creek's edge and found a page torn from her high school graduation program. Her name printed in bold beside her picture. It lay trampled, soaked, half lost in the mud. I tucked it in an evidence bag and stared at the pine trees on the far bank, watching that rust-brown line of shadow, imagining someone standing there just beyond my sight, mouth moving soundlessly. As the helicopter arrived to pick up the body, its blades stirring the air, I climbed back to the road and sat in my cruiser, chest heaving. The morning chill cut through my uniform. I flipped on the defroster, leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, and closed my eyes. I heard Sarah's voice, soft, calling my name. Thompson, Thompson. I left her car there, roadside. Evidence markers surrounding it like tombstones. I drove back to the station without turning on the radio, feeling each heartbeat as though it echoed through my skull. When I got inside, the bullpen was quiet. Most of the officers were still on their shifts. Sergeant Ingram met me at the door, face drawn, eyes bloodshot. He put a hand on my shoulder. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I looked at him, hands clenched at my sides. "Not good," I said. "Not good at all." He nodded and guided me to his office. I sat in a chair across from his desk and watched him close the door. He cleared his throat. "This is beyond anything we've seen before. I don't know if this was Reyes," he said. I shook my head. "It wasn't him. He's locked up." He folded his hands on the desk. "We think someone else may be doing the same thing, or maybe it's a copycat." Either way, it looks like they know exactly what Reyes did, have the same methods. My hands shook. A copycat? My voice cracked. Who would do this? He shrugged. Someone who's been following the case. Maybe someone who worked with Reyes or learned of his pattern. Or worse, it could be a network. People who share details on the internet, passing files back and forth. The words sounded like a curse. So this whispering, the calls in the night, someone's riffing on it, collecting names, practicing until they can do it themselves. I leaned back, mind racing. They'll kill more if we don't stop them. Ingram nodded. Agreed. We're sending alerts to other departments across the state, putting out APBs on anyone with similar backgrounds. Former hospital staff, night shift workers, anyone with access to vulnerable data. I pushed out of the chair, bitterness rising in my throat. I thought the nightmare ended when we locked Reyes up. He gave me a hard look. Nightmares don't end. They morph. They shift. They find new faces. I clenched my fists, thinking about my daughter's birthday next week, how I had planned to take her fishing. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe again driving down a lonely highway. I realized that I had become everything I swore I wouldn't. A man haunted by shadows, listening for whispers in the wind. Ingram stood, placed a hand on my shoulder. Go home, clear your head, get some rest. I nodded numbly. I left the station, carrying my badge in my pocket. I didn't trust the cruiser on that day shift. I walked to my brother's house, the late morning sun mocking me with its brightness. When I arrived, Josh was mowing the lawn. He looked up, wiped his brow with a towel, and grinned. You look like you saw a ghost. I didn't answer. I dropped my badge on the porch and silently walked to my room. I sat on the bed and stared at the dual monitors my brother used for work, still shut off. He poked his head in. Rough day? I didn't respond. He left the door open, and I pulled the blankets up around my shoulders. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, the silence didn't scare me. It was a welcome relief, but as I lay there, half asleep, I heard it, soft as a breath. Thompson. So quiet I thought I imagined it, but then, Thompson. It came from the hallway, from the doorway of my bedroom. I sat bolt upright, chest slamming against my ribs, sweeping my gaze toward the door. The hallway was empty. Light from the living room crept in, showing a carpeted floor with no footprints. I stood, heart hammered, and took a step motioning for whoever was there to step forward. The voice came again, from above, soft, urgent. Thompson. My knees buckled and I sank back onto the bed, gripping the blankets. I pressed my head against the pillow, squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was my imagination. Wind rattling the window, or a dream bleeding through. But as I lay there, I realized something I'd known deep down. I could never outrun that voice. It wasn't just a man in scrubs or a pattern of sinister calls. It was an echo of every fear I'd ever had, every late-night call I'd ever answered, and it had learned my name long ago. I don't know how long I stayed there, mattress creaking beneath me, the voice fading into the morning silence, just as Sarah's call turned into a crash, as the boarded-up house turned into ashes, as Reyes turned into a cautionary line in a case file. All of it swirling into one endless whisper. Thompson. I finally climbed out of bed, limbs heavy, and walked into the hallway, expecting to see someone, anything, waiting for me. The hallway was empty. I exhaled, leaned against the wall, sliding down until my back hit the baseboard. I felt the floor shake as my brother paced in the living room, worrying about me. I stood, dusted off my pants, and slipped my badge into my pocket. I grabbed the phone from the nightstand and stared at it, thumb resting over Sarah's number. I thought of her, lying at the bottom of Silver Creek, trusting that I would arrive in time. I realized that no amount of evidence or APBs would stop someone who knew your name, as long as they whispered it in the dark. Without turning on the lights, I walked out of the house into the rising sun. The world seemed too bright, too alive, as if mocking me. I blinked, feeling tears sting my eyes. I climbed into my cruiser and drove back toward the highway, clock ticking midday. Somewhere beyond that bend in the road, someone was waiting, leaning over a passenger seat whispering a name. My name. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. I drove past the diner, the foliage along the roadside, and out onto an open stretch of highway, knowing there would be no end to the darkness that lived in the spaces between streetlights. No cure for the voice that echoed through my mind, whispering my name when the world was still and no one answered but me. I left the cruiser idling in my brother's driveway, heart still hammering against my ribs like a prisoner thrashing at his cage. Dawn was approaching, pale light seeping through clouds so low they looked as if they might spill rain at any moment. I sat there listening to the radio's low hum, trying to pull myself out of the spiraling thoughts. But every muscle in my body trembled with the memory of my own name whispered in that deadened hallway. The hush of my brother's house, the way that nighttime darkness had felt almost liquid, smothering. I realized I had not slept. I had not found rest in 2 years, and in the past 24 hours, the darkness had found a new victim to lure. Sarah Lawson. I killed the radio and forced myself to climb out of the cruiser. The air was crisp, smelling of wet asphalt, and the faint tang of pine from the line of trees separating my brother's property from open fields. I tugged my uniform coat around me and stepped onto the lawn, the grass wet with dew. Every blade seemed alive, pressing upward against my boots. I felt exposed in the gray morning, vulnerable. The dread from last night's whisper remained, lodged in the pit of my stomach like an uninvited guest. I needed coffee. I needed clarity. But every cafe in Spencer's Mill opened at 7, and it was barely 6. I walked to the front door of my brother's house, paused for a moment and knocked. Within seconds, he answered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His face registered alarm. My bedroom door wide open despite the early hour. "You okay?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. I forced a nod. My limbs felt heavy. Each movement required effort, as though gravity had increased overnight. "Yeah, just thinking." He gave me a pointed look that said he didn't believe the lie. He offered me a cup of coffee. I accepted without hesitation. The rich aroma filled my nostrils and cut through some of the leftover haze. I felt gratitude for the simple warmth, a sensory anchor holding me to the present. He followed me into the kitchen as I poured the steaming brew into a chipped mug. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "We need to talk about last night," he said quietly. I met his eyes, tired but determined. "Lieutenant Ingram called. He said they found Sarah's body." He cringed, looking away. I took a sip, the scalding liquid burning my tongue. "She was on her way home from work, wasn't she?" he asked softly, lowering his voice as if not to disturb the neighborhood. I nodded. She believed the whisper, thought it was her mother. My voice caught. I focused on the counter, tracing water stains with my fingertip. "She tried to hold out until I got there. She called dispatch again, waited for us to respond, but the car veered off. They think she fell asleep, but I know she didn't." He reached out, tapping my arm gently. "You did everything you could." I pulled away and drained the rest of the coffee in a single gulp. The surge of heat did nothing to calm me. If anything, it stoked the ember of rage flickering in my chest. She died waiting for me, I said, voice raw. She thought I'd arrive in time. My brother's gaze shifted to the mug in my hand, now empty. He nodded slowly, hands digging into his own pockets. "What will you do?" he asked. I straightened and exhaled. "I have to find who did this to her." He studied me, his brow furrowed. "You know, this could be more than just a copycat. It might be a network of people doing this across multiple states. You going after them alone." He didn't finish. He was right. The fear that had stalked me for years was no longer localized to Iowa or Indiana. It had spread. But I couldn't stop, not now. "I'll ask for help. We'll put out statewide bulletins. We'll check hospital records, discharge lists, every patient who fit the profile." He nodded again, resigned. "Just be careful." I spent the next hour drafting emails and radio bulletins. Suspicious calls, victims of whispered names, avoid highways at night if possible. Listing details that resembled Reyes's pattern. I requested cooperation from neighboring jurisdictions. By 8 o'clock, I was heading back to the station, clutching a folder containing lists of recent elderly discharges, Sarah's case file, and sketches of footprints found near her car. I felt a growing sense of dread. Every office light I passed reminded me of the meticulous nurse who had first begun this horror. And I feared the copycat had gone a step further, no longer needs to target only the elderly. Sarah was 19. That meant whoever or whatever was orchestrating this had no mercy, no bounds. At the station, Sergeant Ingram met me at the door. His face bore the wear of too many late nights, his jaw shaded by stubble. "Any leads?" he asked. I handed him a printout. "New footprints found. Looks like a pair of boots matching a size 14. Greater weight distribution, as if heavier on the inside." He flipped the page. "That jacket did tests on it. No prints, no fibers. Looks like it's well treated to avoid detection." I nodded. "So we're looking for someone who's clean, has knowledge of forensics." He rubbed his temples. "Computer scans on hospital staff databases nationwide can be done, but that'll take time." I said nothing. Time was something I no longer had. Ingram thumbed through the list of recent calls. "You want to go out tonight?" My gaze hardened. I have to. If there's someone out there, I'd rather find them before they target someone else. He hesitated, but then nodded. "All right, we'll do it together." I felt a surge of relief. If we worked as a team, maybe I could hold on to my sanity. That evening, we began a covert patrol. 2 cruisers, undercover vests, casual attire so as not to alert whoever might be watching. We joined Officer Garcia on his usual route, a familiar winding road dotted with ranch and split-level homes. The streetlights flickered. The wind carried the distant sound of coyotes. I felt my pulse spike every time the headlights of a passing car illuminated a driveway, every time a gust of wind rattled a window. We listened for a whisper, the smallest sign that someone was calling a name. At 2:14 a.m., a dispatch call came in. A woman down on Brookhaven Circle. "I think it's my husband calling me," she said, her voice trembling. She reported hearing Emily through the open window, though she lived alone since her husband divorced her in 2010. She said she'd left town for 6 months and returned last week. Desperate, she'd left a spare key under a flower pot. The flowers were wilted, petals dried. She dialed 911 when she heard the whisper last night at 2:13 a.m. He said my name just like he always used to. I slammed the cruiser into drive and we rushed to Brookhaven Circle, adrenaline flooding my veins. The neighborhood was deserted, white picket fences lining lawns freshly mowed. We parked with overhead lights off and slipped out in darkness. I carried a pistol. My vest felt heavy against my chest. We knocked gently on the screen door of the house, flashlight beams sweeping over vinyl siding. The address, 2470, matched the report. The front door opened to reveal a tall, thin woman in her late 50s, shoulders hunched, eyes red. She clutched a ceramic pot, the one with the flowers, and pointed to the entryway. "This was my mother's gift to me," she whispered. "I put it there last week. I came home last night and heard my name, Emily, before I felt something brushing my arm. I peeked through the window. I didn't see anyone. I locked my doors, but I can't sleep." I offered a calm nod. "I'm Officer Thompson. We're going to check your house. Stay here." Her face was pale as a sheet, and she nodded once. She stepped into the living room, wedging the door shut behind her. I and Officer Garcia kicked off from the porch, moving to cover the side yard. Our boots sank into thick grass. I drew in a slow breath, steadying my aim. We split up and approached from opposite sides, flashlights illuminating windows, checking for any sign. The back door was locked. The locks hadn't been tampered with. But as I moved to examine the sliding glass door to the sunroom, I saw something odd. Muddy footprints pressed into the sod, leading to a patch of ivy near a window. I followed them quietly, heart pounding. They trailed to a side window that stood slightly ajar, the latch untouched. Someone had pushed it open from the outside, but with a careful fingertip, leaving no extra gaps. I signaled Officer Garcia, pointing to the window. He nodded and crept toward the front of the house. I slipped through the opening with my kneecap bumping softly against the frame, landing on smooth tile. The air inside was cooler, smelling faintly of lavender. Air freshened and intentionally masked. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing Emily had once filled this house with life, and now it was a theater for terror. I whispered into my radio, "I'm in." No signs of movement yet. My flashlight's beam swept the sunroom. White wicker chairs, potted ferns, and an old ottoman pushed against the far wall. My boots sunk into a thin layer of soil dumped from a planter disturbed, pottery shards glinting under the beam. I moved out of the sunroom cautiously, stepping into the hallway. It was a narrow corridor, cream-colored walls, family photos hung at a slight angle, the frames swaying gently as if nudged by a ghost. I heard a faint sound, the scrape of fabric against floor. I aimed my light toward the end of the hall, where it terminated in a doorway to the master bedroom. The carpet there was flattened in a kidney-shaped pattern, as though someone had knelt or sat. My breath caught. I stepped forward. The closet door stood open slightly, its doors stained and warped. I nudged it with my toe and shone my flashlight inside. A man's leather jacket, the same style as the one found in Sarah's car, hung from a plastic hanger. Beneath it lay a pair of muddy boots, size 14. My throat constricted. I backed out and reached for my radio. "Sergeant, I found a jacket in the closet. Boots, size 14, muddy, looks like the same pattern." The voice crackled back. "Copy that. Units are converging on your location. Proceed with caution." I slipped back into the hallway, keeping the door to the sunroom between me and the closet. The overhead light in the bedroom flickered as though the bulb were dying, casting the walls in a wavering glow. Against the far wall, I saw the bed, tidy, as though Emily had made it that afternoon. But I noticed something on the pillows, an index card, pinned beneath a pillowcase corner, with a date scribbled, April 4th, 2012. E. Smith, alone, 2:14 a.m. My heart sank. The pattern continued. Whoever was targeting these people was moving like a spider across a web, following discharge dates, hospital records, nights when they thought no one would protect them. I swept the flashlight back to the closet. The jacket's brand tag was unmarked. Someone had cut off labels, sewn over seams, left it impossible to trace without chemical analysis. I crouched and snapped a photo with my phone. Leather grain, stitching patterns. I scanned the boots, caked in damp dirt that looked fresh. If I could find where that soil matched, maybe I could trace his steps to a back road or a hideout. I pocketed the phone and eased toward the foot of the bed. The light overhead flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the corner, something darker than the shadow. I leveled my beam there, nothing, but I felt something brush my arm, subtle, like a finger's graze. I spun, pistol drawn, but the hallway was empty. Light from the sunroom spilled into the space, showing the carpeted floor. No footprints, no sign, just silence. I heard the crunch of boots on tile behind me, responding units converging. Officer Garcia's voice called out, "All clear here, just awaiting forensics." Footsteps grew louder. I walked back through the sunroom to the side window. The frame had indentations where someone's weight had pressed. I clipped on the radio mic. Sergeant, the suspect, exited through the back, used the side window, went into the sunroom. I paused, noticing a single footprint pressed into the leaf litter under the window. I aimed the flashlight at it. It was fresh, as though made within the last hour. I snapped more photos, careful not to disturb them. I turned and walked out of the sunroom, meeting Officer Garcia at the next turn. His face was pale, brows furrowed. I gestured toward the window. He got away. He nodded, jaw clenched. "We're running plate checks, all local hospitals notified. The state lab is en route. They'll analyze the soil and the fibers." I swallowed, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over me. But there was no time to rest. There was always another victim, another whisper. I moved to stand where Emily had knelt, where her fear had been written in waterproof footprints, and whispered please. The house was bustling with uniformed officers now, taking statements from neighbors, dusting for prints, canvassing for surveillance cameras. I lingered in the sunroom, heart pounding slowly as forensics lifted fingerprints from the jacket and photographed the boots. I saw the entry point beneath the window, oak shavings at the sill where someone had pried a slender panel of siding. A chisel mark, shallow, just enough to wedge the window open. He knew exactly how to avoid making noise, how to bypass locks. He'd watched Reyes's methods like a student copying from a master. But he'd made mistakes here, the boot prints, the index card left as a mark. He was arrogant, leaving breadcrumbs in his haste as if taunting us to catch him. I felt a knot tighten in my gut. I'd find him. I would. But as I left the house and walked toward my cruiser, I felt something cold slither into my chest. Doubt. He was unpredictable. He could strike anywhere at any time. Would strike while I slept, while I took a shower, even when I closed my eyes and thought I was safe. I slid into the passenger seat, the jacket and boots evidence bag stowed beside me. Officer Garcia eased into the driver's seat. I exhaled, a long, slow release. We have to find out who he's targeting next. If we don't, someone will die. He nodded, eyes steady on the road. I'll get the lab results as soon as they come in. For now, let's head back to Spencer's Mill and regroup. I looked out the window as we drove past the darkened fields, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. Every house we passed stirred a memory. Mrs. Foley, Mr. Delgado, Sarah Lawson, and now Emily Smith, lives shattered by whispers in the night. Each one convinced they had time to wait for help, each one wrong. I turned to Garcia. "Pull over at Joanne's diner," I said. "I need coffee." He glanced at me, brown eyes wary, but slid the cruiser to the side as I climbed out. Inside, the diner was empty. Lamps overhead flickered as the staff prepared for the morning rush. I took a booth facing the window and ordered black coffee. The cup arrived a few minutes later, steam curling above it. I brought it to my lips and inhaled, once, twice, letting the bitterness sink into my bones. I stared at my reflection in the glass, dark circles under tired eyes, uniform still stained from last night's exposure to the elements. I felt hollow, as though my soul had been drained, but there was still fight in me. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. I typed, pattern, whispered name, entry through vulnerable window, hospital discharge list, specific times after midnight, victims home alone or believe they are alone, footprint size 14, muddy, leather jacket, potential next target, elderly, discharge date around March the 28th, identity, Charles Gibbons, 67, lives at 512 Old Mill Road. My heart constricted as I typed his name. He'd been in Cedar Creek for congestive heart failure, discharged 2 weeks ago. No family to visit. Lives on a dead end outside town. I tapped out a quick text to Sergeant Ingram. Notify units. Check Old Mill Road. Engage knock and talk before 2 a.m. I watched as the dawn light grew stronger outside, casting golden streaks across the booth's vinyl. With every passing minute, the chance to save Charles slipped away. As I turned off my phone, I noticed the neon open sign flickering, a tenuous promise of safety. But I knew it was a lie. No sign or patrol could keep the darkness from creeping in. I finished my coffee and stood, straightening my tie. As I walked past the counter, the cook gave me a sympathetic nod. I felt his silent awareness. In this part of the world, everyone knew the stories. He wiped his apron and said, "Stay safe, officer." I nodded, but I wasn't sure what safe even meant anymore. Back in the cruiser, Officer Garcia waited with lights off. I slid in beside him and buckled up as he merged onto the highway. The warmth of the engine spread through me, but my mind ran cold with the reality that the next call would come soon, and it might be a race I couldn't win. As we drove toward Old Mill Road, the landscape shifted to rolling farmland dotted with homesteads. The silhouettes of barns and silos loomed against a sky streaked pink and orange. It was beautiful in the morning light, a stark contrast to the terror that haunted me. Every house on this stretch was an invitation for terror. Every untended porch light was a beacon for the whispered name. We approached the turnoff for Old Mill Road, an unpaved lane flanked by 2 oak trees whose branches met overhead. The gravel crunched beneath our tires as we rolled toward number 512, an L-shaped house set back 50 yards from the road, with a sagging porch and broken shutters. The front yard was unkempt, tall grass brushing against a rusted mailbox with the number barely legible. A single porch light was on, dim, flickering. I killed the engine as the cruiser coasted to a stop. The moment the engine died, I heard it. A soft rustle of wind through leaves, though no breeze stirred. I looked up. The oak branches shook as though someone had brushed past them, silent. I felt my pulse spike. I handed my radio to Garcia, his grip firm. He tapped his earpiece. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. We're at 512 Old Mill Road. Request perimeter. Additional units to stage nearby." He paused, then added, "And lights. Lights on at the house, please." Silence answered us. The porch light blinked once, then flickered off. My heart pounded against my chest bone. I exhaled slowly, forcing calm. We slipped out of the cruiser, backs to each other, flashlights drawn. My boots crushed gravel as I approached the porch steps, Garcia covering my back. I examined the bottom step where muddy footprints pressed into the dirt. They were fresh enough that the pattern of heel and sole was crisp. He'd been here tonight. I stepped onto the porch and peered through the dusty windows. The living room was dark, but I saw movement, shadows shifting behind the curtains. I knocked on the door and called out, "Sir, Mr. Gibbons. It's Officer Thompson and Officer Garcia. We received a call you heard your name tonight?" No answer. The hush pressed in. I wrapped my gloved hand around the doorknob. Cold metal. I tested it. Locked. I pointed my flashlight at the door frame and saw a thin groove where a screwdriver had been forced. He'd pried the door earlier, testing limits. I whispered to Garcia, "Back door, patio, sneak around with me." We moved to the side of the house where a sliding glass door led into the kitchen. The glass was intact, but one of the window latches beneath it was bent. Someone had jiggled it until it clicked. I tugged gently on the handle. It gave way, and we slipped inside, silent as shadows. I stood in the kitchen, breathing quietly, listening for any sign of life. The house smelled of stale air, like it hadn't been opened in days. The tile floor was cold beneath my boots. I scanned the counters. A mug with leftover coffee, half filled, and a stack of mail on the table, mostly medical bills. I heard a soft creak, floorboards shifting under weight. My flashlight beam caught the edge of a recliner in the living room, pulled back slightly as though someone had just stood up. I moved toward it, senses on high. My hand touched a side table. A picture frame tilted. Inside was a photo of Mr. Gibbons with his late wife. They looked happy, arms around each other. I swallowed, the emotional weight pressing me down. He was innocent. He was vulnerable. He deserved safety. If I failed him like I failed Sarah, I would never forgive myself. I stepped into the living room. The air was still except for a low hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen. My flashlight caught a faint movement in the corner, there, near the stairwell descending to the basement. I pivoted, pointing my beam. The shadows danced. I felt something brush my shoulder lightly, like a finger of cold air. I spun again, nothing. I heard a faint whisper, "Thompson." My name carried on a voice that twisted with malicious delight. A current of terror shot through me. I gripped my pistol tighter, heart hammering. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the darkness behind the recliner. Boots thudded on carpet as he charged. Leather jacket, hood pulled low, face obscured. I fired, the blast echoing off walls. He yelped, stumbling. I thought I'd hit him, but he rolled and vanished into the staircase. Garcia jumped at my side, flashlight pinned on the spot. We both aimed at the darkness. He sprinted past us, descending into the basement. I followed, each step reverberating beneath my boots. The basement door was open a crack. Light flickered from below. More whispers echoed, "Thompson, Thompson," urging me forward. I crept down the stairs, the drywall on either side scuffed. Nail marks where someone had clawed their way down. The air smelled of damp concrete and mildew. At the bottom, the narrow room stretched before me. A workbench along one wall, tools scattered across it. To the left, a door with a small window, its glass smeared. The whispers grew louder, layered, a chorus of voices. I pressed my back against the wall, hand on the pistol, and stepped toward the middle of the room. I scanned every shadow as Garcia's beam joined mine. The metal door at the far end of the basement was ajar. Soft light spilled through the gap, yellow like a bare bulb. I edged closer. My heart thudded so loudly it felt like the building would collapse. In my peripheral vision, I saw a shadow move across the wall, slither almost. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside was a small utility closet, shelves lined with empty paint cans and cleaning supplies. But on the floor was something unexpected, an old Polaroid camera resting beside a yellowing index card. I knelt to pick up the card. It read, April 5th, 12, C. Gibbons, found so soon. Good luck, officer. Below the writing was a photo. Mr. Gibbons's face, pale and lifeless, lying on stone near the creek bed. Freshly printed, edges blunt. My stomach clenched. He was dead. I stared at the photo as I sank to my knees, the weight of failure crushing me. The whispers swirled, surrounding me, a tangled chorus of voices from the past. Sarah, Emily, Clara, each name laced with terror and betrayal. Garcia's flashlight beam found me. He crouched beside me, silent. He's gone, I murmured, voice barely audible. He's already taken him. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. I closed my eyes. The echoing footsteps above, the hushed drum of rain against the basement window, simultaneously distant and immediate, felt like a dirge. I stood, cradling the Polaroid. I felt hollow, broken. Each whisper had led to a death. I was too late, as I feared I would be. The weight of my own name, once a shield, now a gauntlet, of guilt, pressed on my soul. I looked at Garcia. We need to find whoever did this, now. He nodded and helped me to my feet. But as we left the basement, I realized something cold and inevitable. No matter how many I caught, no matter how many bulletins we issued, the darkness would not stop. It would echo in every corner of night, whispering names, luring more victims who trusted a voice they wanted to believe was safe. And I, who carried that name as a badge of honor, was now forced to watch it be used as an instrument of fear, one that I could never silence. As we emerged from the basement into the cold dawn, I felt the weight of the world in my bones. The sun was rising higher now, a wilting promise of safety. But I knew the light could not reach every shadow. The darkness had already spread, and the whispers would follow. I clasped the Polaroid in my hand, the photo of Mr. Gibbons steaming as though it had just been developed. His eyes were closed, peaceful, a stark contrast to the horror that had claimed him. I swallowed hard. We do this together, I said to Garcia, voice steadier than I felt. We catch whoever's left. He met my gaze, eyes unwavering. We will. But as the wind rattled the front door and rattled the house, I felt that final whisper brush against my ear, soft, intimate, unrelenting. Thompson. And I understood, with a chill that ran from my spine to my skull, that the hunt would never end, as long as the night remained. I sat in the back of the cruiser, the Polaroid pressed into my palm like a jagged shard of glass. The grainy image of Mr. Gibbons at the creek felt impossibly recent, as though the water had only just flashed past his lifeless face. I lifted my gaze to the passing tree line, ghostly in the dim morning light. Somewhere beyond those oaks, he might still be lurking, tracing my footsteps, waiting for the next midnight lull. The odor of damp earth and decomposing leaves drifted through the cracked window as Garcia maneuvered the cruiser down Old Mill Road. Every bump in the gravel under our tires reverberated through my spine, each one a reminder of the silence that had swallowed Charles Gibbons's final scream. I thumbed the Polaroid again, the photo trembling in my grip. My mind replayed the moment we found him. The plastic coldness of that index card, the hollow ring of his name scrawled across it. Good luck, officer, it had said. That twisted punctuation, like a full stop marking the end of someone's life, felt like a challenge I still hadn't met. We pulled off onto Highway 62, heading back to Spencer's Mill in silence. I stared out the passenger window as the sun climbed, the farmland giving way to an old rail line and abandoned silos. Thoughts jumbled. Where would the next whisper come from? An elderly person alone at 2:14 a.m., expecting nothing more sinister than a bad dream, only to feel the hairs on the back of their neck stand at attention as someone murmured their name. I thought of every victim who'd answered just before their world snapped shut. Such a tiny threshold between comfort, trusting a familiar voice, and horror. The flicker of a porch light, the dull patter of rain on a tin roof, a late-night radio station gone silent. Those were the alarms I'd learned to heed. Yet here I was, already feeling the pull of fatigue after barely sleeping for 2 nights, chasing a predator across state lines. How many times could I relive the same nightmare without losing my mind? Officer Garcia cleared his throat. Sergeant Ingram called, wants an update. He's bringing in a sketch artist. We'll have to give our statements again. I closed my eyes, trying to stave off a headache. Tell him I'll head straight to the precinct. I need to sort through the Gibbons files, see if there's anything I missed. He nodded, and the engine's hum filled the space between us. The world outside the window brightened as we neared town. The rusted water tower that read Spencer's Mill in peeling letters. The lone traffic light blinking over the intersection of Main and Elm, the Starbucks with half its sign missing. Each landmark felt like a resting station on a line marked Despair, but I forced my chest to loosen. I would keep going for them. I owed it to Sarah, Emily, Clara, Arthur, and now Charles, names stitched into the thread of my guilt. By mid-morning, we were at the station. Dispatch buzzed with routine calls, traffic accidents, minor vandalism, noise complaints. I passed through the bullpen toward the sergeant's office, catching glimpses of fellow officers' weary faces. They looked at me like I carried a storm cloud in my chest. Ingram met me in the doorway, arms folded, shoulders stooped. He pointed to the file cart near his desk, where stacks of papers were piled almost as high as his desk lamp. We have charts, discharge summaries, hospital rosters, witness statements, everything we've compiled in the last month, he said. The sketch artists, running behind schedule, so take whatever time you need. We'll start canvassing Old Mill Road tonight at dusk. I nodded and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The room felt small, the air heavy with anticipation. Ingram sank into his chair, bringing his face close to mine. Thompson, are you sure you want to keep doing this? I mean, go after him full force? I pressed my lips together. If I don't, he'll kill someone else. He exhaled. I know. Just take a break when you can. I waved him off, though my vision blurred briefly. I leaned against the file cart, hands grazing the manila folders. I lifted one labeled Gibbons, Charles, Cedar Creek, discharged March 12th, 12, and flipped it open. His chart showed he'd been in for acute congestive heart failure. No family listed. Lived alone on Old Mill Road for nearly 20 years. Notes mentioned he had regular caretaker visits, but no one stayed overnight. Ingram had flagged that as a vulnerability. I skimmed the discharge summary. Vital signs stable, meds prescribed, follow-up in 2 weeks. The last entry said, patient returned home to empty house, advised to call for assistance if needed. I scanned an index card taped to the file. 2 footprints drawn in pencil, explained as size 14, deep imprint, indicative of greater than 200 pounds, narrow tread. That matched the ones we found at Redland Circle, the one from Gibbons's backyard, and the footprints at Emily Smith's porch. I flipped ahead to another folder. Smith, Emily, Spencer's Mill Diner, discharged March 22, 2012. The note here said she'd been treated for minor lacerations after a car accident, released the same day with instructions to rest and avoid stress. I remembered her tossing that index card under her pillow, thinking it was a cruel prank. I flipped further. Lawson, Sarah, Spencer's Mill General, discharged February 28, 12, indicated she was treated for dehydration and minor head trauma after her car hit a deer on the highway. We'd closed her file last week when her body was recovered. In each case, the pattern emerged: a vulnerable person, discharged from a local hospital, living alone or convinced they were alone, attacked or lured in the early hours following a whispered name. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. My chest felt 2 sizes too small, constricted by each memory. I willed my hand not to tremble as I closed the Gibbons folder and slid the stack aside. It was time to find his killer's next move. I rose, and Ingram looked up from his desk, his face drawn with concern. I told him, "Load up the ambulance bay, we're going to test a bait and switch. I want a decoy discharge. Someone who fits the pattern, someone with a house off the main road, living alone, and we'll station an undercover stakeout team nearby." Ingram's eyes sharpened. "You think we can bait him into revealing himself?" I nodded. "If he can't resist the call, he'll show up." He sighed, exhaling a cloud of tension. "All right, let's do it. But protect them, Thompson. Absolutely no mistakes." We spent the next 2 hours preparing. Ingram and I pored over local hospital logs, identifying one promising candidate, a woman named Margaret Maggie O'Donnell, 69, recently discharged after a minor stroke from Spencer's Mill General. She lived off a dirt road called Linden Hollow, a 3-mile drive from the hospital. No immediate family. Her nearest neighbor was half a mile away. O'Donnell fit every criterion: elderly, recuperating, alone in a secluded house. We called her primary care nurse, explained our plan without details, had to check on welfare, routine follow-up, pretending to be concerned for her health. She agreed to cooperate, trusting the hospital's request. We promised to keep her safe. At 5 p.m., I found Maggie sitting on her front porch swing, sipping iced tea and watching her small garden that survived the winter chill. She wore a light shawl over her shoulders, and her hair was curled neatly, though the tremor in her hands betrayed lingering weakness. I introduced myself as Officer Thompson, told her we wanted to ensure she was okay after her discharge. She winced when she stood, but her voice remained steady. "Thank you for checking on me, officer," she said. "They say I should rest, but it's so hard sitting alone all day." I offered a gentle nod. "I get it," I said. "Listen, if you hear anything unusual, voices, noises, anything, call us immediately. We'll send someone right away." She hugged herself, glancing at the horizon where the sky bled pink. Can you stay for a bit?" she asked, unease flickering in her gaze. I caught Ingram's eye. He was parked across the dusty lane, engine idling. I said, "I'm on duty. I have to go check my cruiser, but I'll be back. Don't worry." Her brow furrowed, but she managed a small smile. "All right, be careful out there." As I walked toward the cruiser, I felt every eye on me. Every neighbor, hidden behind curtains, craning to see what would happen next. I climbed into the passenger seat and Ingram closed the door. He handed me a headset. I clipped it on. "We have units positioned around Linden Hollow. Surveillance cameras are focused on the road. Question: how long do we wait?" He glanced at his watch. "We give it until at least 3 a.m. That's when the pattern tends to be in full swing. Victims are half asleep off guard. If he's coming tonight, that's our window." I tapped the Polaroid into the dash console, lining it up under a light so I could glance at the face without straining. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. If he shows, I want to sign on quietly. Approach from the north side. There's a stand of pines 20 feet from her bedroom window. He'll likely move quietly through the trees, testing windows. We can cut him off there. Ingram nodded. What if he tries something else? A different entrance? My gaze dropped to my lap. He could, but if we're lucky, his pattern holds. He's predictable, too confident. He scouts the easiest route for entry, the weakest window, the dim porch light, the path of least resistance. I turned the key in the ignition and fired up the engine. The heater hummed to life, a futile attempt to chase away the cold I felt in my bones. I leaned forward, chin resting on my folded hands. I'll head over to her place, park in the driveway. I'll keep my lights off until I see him. Ingram sighed. Just be careful. We don't know if he's armed. I forced a nod. I'll keep my weapon holstered until we confirm it's him. This is a stealth operation. I'll try to get close. We reached Linden Hollow as the sky surrendered to the night. A single street lamp flickered at the end of the lane, its light struggling to paint the gravel in a wan glow. The house sat back from the road, a modest ranch home with stone steps leading to the porch. A faint glow emanated from the living room window. The edges of the lace curtains were frayed, stained by years of sun. I parked truthfully. Nothing about this was honest. Angled across from the driveway so my cruiser would be in plain view to any passerby. I killed the engine and slid the door open, boots crunching against gravel. I clipped my flashlight to my belt and tucked my radio into my vest. Ingram and 2 other officers took positions along the tree line, their silhouettes cut angular shapes against the black horizon. I walked up the steps, the oak boards creaking. Maggie's front door stood ajar, a deliberate invitation. We had asked her to leave the door unlocked, so if there was an emergency, we could enter without force. I stepped inside. The air smelled like chamomile tea and old wood. I found her in the living room, seated in a recliner, blanket draped over her knees. She greeted me with a small nod. "Thank you for coming back, officer," she whispered. "I don't know if I'll sleep tonight." I offered a comforting smile. "Don't worry, I'll stay on the porch to keep watch." I stepped back out, leaving the door slightly open so I could retreat if needed. The wind stirred the chimes on her porch that tinkled like distant bells. I patted my holster, checking the weapon inside. No need to have it out, not yet. My job was observation, deterrence. I settled onto the top step, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the dark. The headlights of the cruiser behind me reflected off the mirrored window as I turned my flashlight low, scanning the perimeter. The stand of pines lay to my right, tall trunks clustered together, branches like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. I could imagine a figure pressing against the boards, listening for Maggie's rhythm, her breathing, her every stir. The night was silent, save for that soft hum of the heater inside her living room and the occasional screech of an owl overhead. I tried to focus on the hush, trusting my instincts. I thought of what Reyes had said. I wanted them to answer, to feel safe opening the door. But here, Maggie's awareness of my presence might be her shield. If he tried to whisper her name, she'd have a chance to call me. Hours crawled by. Midnight came, then 1:30. My vigil felt like a model of eternity, each minute stretching longer than the one before. At 1:37 a.m., I heard a soft crunch of gravel in the driveway. My heart lurched. I focused my flashlight down the lane. A figure, hood pulled low, moved toward the house in slow, deliberate steps, each one calculated. I recognized the narrow build, the length of his stride. He paused just past the stand of pines, as though checking for traps. He wore dark jeans, work boots, size 14. He held something in his hand, although I couldn't see clearly from 50 feet away. I stilled, breathing shallow, and clicked my radio mic. "Sergeant, I have visual on a suspect. He's at the tree line. Movement toward the house. Size 14 boots. Ingram's voice crackled back. Copy that. Hold your position. Do not engage until I give the word. The man stepped out from behind the pines and into the beam of my spotlight. His leather jacket was unmistakable under the faint glow. I could just make out the contours of the Polaroid camera hanging from his belt. His head snapped in my direction, and for a moment I thought he'd seen the light. But then he kept moving, crouching low like a wolf stalking prey. I held the beam steady as he crouched at the base of the oak trunk, a single motion, silent, seamless. He drew a long, thin, tube-like object from his jacket. My mind worked in fractions of a second as I recognized it as a syringe. A lethal dose, no doubt. The glass tip gleamed in my light. I swallowed the swallow of fear rising in my throat. He inched forward, arms raised, approaching the ground-level window. He tested the latch with a practiced twist. Finding no resistance, he slid the frame up and slipped inside. I exhaled, as though no air had touched my lungs for hours, voice barely a whisper. He's in. Through the window, I saw him step into the living room. Maggie's silhouette was visible against the glow of her television. She sat on the couch, her blanket pulled up to her chin. She stared at the screen, oblivious. The intruder moved around 3 steps away from her, reaching into a pocket for the syringe. My reflexes kicked in. I pressed my back against the frame of the window, careful not to make noise, and pivoted to Radio Ingram. My jaw clenched. He's in the living room, brandishing a syringe. He's moving slowly, like he wants her to see him before he strikes. Ingram, I whispered fiercely. We need to move, now. He responded with clipped urgency. All units, advance. Code 3, take him alive if possible. Sirens cut through the air as 2 cruisers raced up the lane, headlights blinding. I dropped from the window and kicked off the porch rail, landing on my feet. I grabbed my weapon from its holster, careful not to point it at Maggie. Garcia moved in behind me. The intruder pivoted, tightening his grip on the syringe. His gaze flicked to the window, then to Maggie. His face frozen in obscene anticipation. My finger found the trigger. Park the car, I barked at Garcia. He skidded his cruiser to a stop at the bottom of the steps, lights blazing. 2 officers poured out, weapons drawn. The intruder froze, one arm still raised, syringe glinting. Maggie let out a gasp, realization flickering in her eyes. She pushed back against the couch, desperately trying to scramble away. Her blanket tumbled to the floor. When the intruder finally seemed to register the flashing lights, he bolted toward the hallway. Garcia and I sprinted forward, cutting off the hallway exit. Ingram emerged from behind a pine with 2 more officers fanning out to block the back door. The shooter, thin, hooded, face concealed, slammed into the living room wall, jamming the syringe into a corner table. He spun, yanking at his jacket's zipper, as if he were stripping away his identity. My training kicked in. Drop it, hands above your head, I thundered. He froze, the ripping of his hood echoing as he shook his head, eyes narrowing. He sniffed the air as though smelling something. Fear, perhaps. I saw the shadow of recognition flicker in his gaze. For a moment, we stood in a charged tableau. Me, weapon leveled, knuckles white. Him, bloodless and defiant, lips twisted in a snarl. Then, with a flurry of motion, he bolted down the hallway toward the bedroom. Ingram shouted, yanking his weapon up. But the shooter burst into the open bedroom and, in the same breath, vaulted through the window, landing on the ground in a crouch 20 feet below. His boots clattered on the deck. I fired a warning shot into the wall, hoping to buy time for the others. He sprang to his feet and dashed for the trees. I pushed past Maggie, wrapping my arm around her to guide her off the couch, and sprinted after him as he angled toward the pines. The underbrush whipped at my uniform, branches clawing at my face as I chased him. Ingram and Garcia flanked me on either side as we closed in on the edge of the tree line. Our headlights and flashlights sliced beams through the gloom, searching for the dark shape of a running man. Branches snapped behind us as two officers cut off his path deeper in the forest. I felt my breath coming in ragged gulps, every muscle burning as I closed the gap. I thought of every night spent on surveillance, every whisper of my name that had once tormented me. Now, the whispering figure was only yards ahead, fingertips grazed by moonlight. I pointed my flashlight at him. He spun, eyes wild, chest heaving, then lunged for a narrow gap between a pair of trunks. I tackled him from the side, boots skidding on the damp needles underfoot. He collapsed, and we tumbled, him snarling in pain as I shoved a knee into his side. The syringe had fallen from his pocket in the scuffle. I reached for his wrists, yanking his arms back. He fought like a cornered animal, twisting and flailing, but I locked my grip and forced him onto his stomach. Garcia arrived and pressed down on his legs, pinning him as Ingram cuffed his wrists behind his back. I felt my own pulse thrumming like an angry drumbeat. My uniform was smeared with mud and pine sap, but I didn't care. The man beneath me was gasping, face contorted with rage and fear. I pulled his hood away, fingers numb from the cold. His eyes met mine, deep-set, hollow, lacking humanity. He spat curses. "Why?" I demanded, voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" He tore his gaze away. "You can't stop it," he snarled. "Whispers follow every step. We're all shadows of their fears." His voice was soft, slurred, as though he believed some terrible prophecy. Ingram grabbed his collar, forcing his head up. "Who are you? Tell me who taught you this." The man's jaw clenched. "You did," he rasped, "when you locked Reyes up." He twisted so his head nearly hit the dirt. "You showed me how to do it. You did it first. I just perfected it." My heart lodged in my throat. The implication crashed into me. He'd studied my methods, modeled himself on my investigation, twisted me into a blueprint. I swallowed hard, staring at him, searching his soul for any shred of remorse. But there was only emptiness. We dragged him back to the edge of the clearing as police vehicles converged, red and blue lights swirling on the mossy ground. The ambulance team carried Maggie out on a stretcher. She trembled, tears running down her cheeks, but she was alive, shaken, but alive. I watched her being taken away, wrapping her in blankets, murmuring reassurances. I felt a wave of relief so intense that my knees nearly buckled. The man who nearly killed her was in handcuffs, silent now, face buried in his jacket. As he was led into the back seat of a cruiser, he glanced at me and let out a soft laugh, more like a sigh. "You can't stop it." I followed him with my gaze as they drove away, sirens fading into the distance. The pines seemed to shudder in my wake, as if shaking off something unclean. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. The night that had consumed so many lives was breaking, at least for now. I walked back to Maggie's house, stepping over fallen needles and mud, mind whirling with 1,000 questions. Who trained him? How had he learned so precisely, so intimately the pattern that had guided Reyes? I had thought locking Reyes up would extinguish the fire. Instead, it had spread ash across the land. In the morning, I sat at my desk, head throbbing, hands aching, hearing only the distant hum of the air conditioner. Ingram slipped me a file marked Suspect Jonathan Blake. His background was horrifying. Former corrections officer turned security guard, fired for assaulting inmates. He had moonlighted as a private investigator, digging through medical records to help families file malpractice suits. Somewhere along the way, he'd found Reyes's case in online forums dedicated to unsolved crimes. He'd studied it obsessively, piecing together discharge dates and home addresses. He'd convinced himself it was a righteous crusade, a way to deliver justice to those he deemed unworthy of care. But the brutality, targeting the weak, the isolated, revealed a mind devoured by darkness. I leaned back, pressing the photo of Blake's mugshot to my temple. The lines around his eyes were deep-set, like cradle marks of cruelty, and his thin lips wore a perpetual sneer. I felt bile rise in my throat. Was I partly to blame? Had my own investigation, the way I'd exposed Reyes, unwittingly provided him a template? The thought gnawed at me, a worm at the core of my conviction. I clenched my fist, inching nails into my palm. I would never know the answer, but it drove me to do one thing: expose every corner of this network, crush every ember before it ignited another life. I rose, went to my bookshelf, and retrieved the manila binder labeled Residual Victims. Each folder inside held a Polaroid, a pale, lifeless face, eyes closed, each with an index card pinned below, bearing a date and a name. The shame of my failures flickered across my chest. I placed Blake's photo at the center, revealing a new strategy. Cross-check every hospital staff list for connections, investigate those security clearance logs, scour every message board where someone might whisper a pattern. He wouldn't have found the files without a point of entry, someone who had access. My pulse quickened as I realized the scale. Thousands of files, hundreds of victims, a network concealed behind screens and passwords. I thumbed through the photos. Clara Foley, Arthur Delgado, Emily Smith, Sarah Lawson, Charles Gibbons, each a life extinguished because they trusted a whisper in the dark. Each death a testament to the power of fear. I felt a burning vow rise inside me. I would hunt this network down to its roots. I would never let another person answer their door to a comforting voice only to find fury and death waiting on the threshold. I would not rest. The whispers had followed me home, haunted my dreams, turned my name into a weapon. But now I would turn the tables. I would find every echo, trace it back, cut it off at its source. As I began to organize the new evidence, my phone buzzed. An alert. Another discharge list from Cedar Creek with a vulnerable patient. A man living alone in Maple Ridge Estates. His discharge date placed him squarely in the pattern. The whispering had begun anew. I inhaled, steeling myself. I zipped up my coat, grabbed my keys, and stepped out the door into the evening light. The sky was bruised purple, the world on the cusp of darkness. Somewhere out there, another person would hear their name, whispered through still air, and believe it was a friend, a partner, a loved one. I would be there to break that illusion before they answered. Because I knew now, like I always sensed, that fear was a living creature, born in the hush between midnight and dawn, fed by the faintest breath. And I had made it my mission to starve it. The night had claimed too many already. It would not claim another. I walked through the station doors, the hum of activity greeting me, colleagues' eyes flicking with curiosity and respect. I headed straight to the sergeant's desk. "We have another potential target," I said. "We move now." Ingram nodded, eyes fixed on me. For once I felt the weight of purpose outweigh the weight of guilt. The whispers could still come, but they would no longer be unnoticed. I felt the echo of my own name slip from my lips. Thompson, not as a curse, but as a warning. And I would answer it with action, not fear. As the last rays of light slipped below the horizon, I stepped into the night ready for the hunt. The cruiser's headlights pierced the dusk as we turned onto Pine Hollow Trail. The narrow lane, flanked by towering maples, whose bare branches reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. The final folder in my binder, Linden Ridge, Potential Targets, lay on the passenger seat, edges curling from my constant flipping. The index card for Michael Anders, age 64, discharged from Cedar Creek for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease on April 2nd, waited at his address, 15 Maple Ridge Estates. No known family. Lived alone since his wife passed 2 years ago. Caregivers visited in the afternoon, but never at night. He fit the pattern too precisely. I glanced over at Sergeant Ingram, eyes cold in the dark, and said, "He might be sitting in his living room right now, thinking he's safe. We're going to change that in his favor, but he doesn't know it yet." Ingram nodded and signaled to Garcia, who followed us with a second cruiser. We arrived at 15 Maple Ridge Estates at 8:17 p.m., hours before midnight. The house was modest, a ranch-style home with vinyl siding, a single carport to one side, and a motion-activated porch light that flickered on as we approached. I killed the engine, letting the silence swallow us. The yard lay empty, save for a small flower bed near the front stoop. I opened the door and climbed out, the gravel crunching under my boots, the air cool and still. A few neighbors peered from their windows, curiosity visible in their silhouettes. We'd explained a wellness check. Someone was concerned about Mr. Anders' health. They offered nods of sympathy, but no one questioned our timing. Nobody said, "Why so early?" or, "Why would someone target him?" Because they trusted us. They believed our badges meant protection, and tonight that trust would be their shield. I approached the front door, carrying the pretense we'd rehearsed. "Officer Thompson," I called softly, voice low. "Mr. Anders, we're here for your follow-up appointment. Can we come in?" I rapped on the door in a code, once loud, twice soft, thrice loud, an agreed signal for medical staff to announce themselves. The door clicked open, and a frail figure appeared in the threshold. Silver hair, stooped shoulders, a cardigan pulled tight around his thin frame. His eyes widened when he saw us. "Officers," he managed, voice raspy. I didn't. I stepped aside, flashing a small laminated card with the hospital's emblem. "Mr. Anders, this is a routine check to make sure you're doing all right after your last hospital stay. We just want to ask you a few questions." His gaze flicked to the sergeant beside me. I saw the relief flicker in his eyes. He backed up, motioned for us to enter, and closed the door behind him. Inside, the house smelled faintly of mothballs and boiled cabbage. The wallpaper at the end of the hallway was yellowed and peeling, and family photos lined a narrow counter. His late wife, 2 children grown and gone, a wedding portrait capturing a moment of long-ago happiness. I noted it all as I stepped into the living room. The floor creaked under my weight. In the center stood a floral-patterned recliner turned toward the television, off now, but still warm from earlier use. He gestured for us to sit as he shuffled toward a kitchen sideboard, where a ceramic cat figurine perched next to an old landline phone. "Would you like some water?" he asked, voice wavering. The motion-activated lights in the kitchen buzzed to life. He poured water into 2 glasses and brought one to me. I accepted it without breaking my calm. "Thank you," I said, setting the glass on the coffee table, bile rising at the pattern repeating in my mind. I listened as Anders sank into the recliner. "I've been sleeping fine," he said. "My breathing's been better since I started the new inhaler." I nodded, watching for any signs of stress or confusion, tachycardia, involuntary tremors. He looked almost serene, unaware of the trap closing around him. I leaned forward, folding my hands. "That's good to hear. Have you experienced any unusual sounds at night?" Voices? Anything you couldn't explain? His brow furrowed. Yes, actually, last night around 2, maybe 2:14, I heard someone whisper my name. Michael, Michael. I thought it was a dream, but I woke up. I flipped on the lamp and didn't see anyone. His eyes darted to the curtained window behind me. I thought it might be the wind. The trees outside bang against the house sometimes. He swallowed, and I noticed a faint sheen of sweat at his temples. Did you lock your windows? I asked. He lifted his hand to his forehead. Yes, I do every night. But this voice, it felt too real, like someone stood in the hallway calling me. I thought it might be a neighbor playing a prank, but I didn't know who it could be. My heart pounded. I cleared my throat. I want to check your windows and doors, just to be safe. Would you mind stepping back? He nodded uncertainly, and I stood. I circled the house with Ingram and Garcia behind me, shining our flashlights on each latch and doorknob, each window lock. The pattern repeated. No signs of prying or tampering, except a fine scratch on the latch of the bedroom window, barely noticeable, but there, and faint footprints pressed into the flowerbed dirt. Size 14, narrow tread, patched with pine needles. They led to a gap between a wooden slat at the fence's edge. I leafed through my flashlight's beam as I traced their path. Sergeant, I whispered into my radio, we have footprints. He's been here. That window was his entry point last night. Ingram radioed, understood. Units, stand by. We have a positive at 15 Maple Ridge. We stepped back inside. I helped Mr. Anders to stand. We'll stay the night, I lied. We have to make sure you're safe. Relief and fear warred in his eyes. He nodded, voice trembling. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do otherwise. I sat back in the recliner across from him, propping the glass of water on the arm. Ingram and Garcia took up positions at the entrance to the hallway and by the kitchen doorway, respectively. We spoke only in whispers after that, occasionally asking Mr. Anders simple questions, his medical history, whether he'd been up in the middle of last night if he saw anything. But he'd only seen the open window and the footprints outside. Midnight arrived without incident. The house settled into a hush thick as fog. I watched his chest rise and fall in the beam of the bedside lamp. Then, exactly at 2:13 a.m., I felt it. The hush snapped, replaced by the faintest sound of shuffling from the hallway behind me. My heart seized. The lamp's pull chain still hung above Mr. Anders. I told him under my breath, "Stay here. Keep your phone on you." He nodded, face pale. I rose with deliberate calm and clicked off the lamp. The living room was bathed in blue from the streetlight filtering through the window. I edged toward the hallway, weapon drawn. Each step echoed on wooden floors. Each breath felt like static in the bone. The shuffling grew louder, footsteps careful and slow, accompanied by the softest rasp of someone whispering something just beyond my hearing. I trained the beam of my flashlight into the corridor, faded wallpaper, a family calendar marked on April 5th, today. The entries read, furnace check, grocery delivery, and at the bottom, penciled in, feeling wells, enigmatic. My mind snapped back to the pattern. Each victim's name called precisely at 2:14 a.m. last night. I swallowed, thumb resting on the trigger guard. I advanced, instinct driving me toward the master bedroom door. It stood ajar, darkness beyond. I heard the whisper again. Thompson. The breathy voice rang inside my skull, pressing on my eardrums, but it wasn't my name. It was the killer's voice using my name as his own sign, reminding me he knew I was here. A chill bit into my spine. I yanked the door open in a single motion. The bedroom lay empty, bedsheets rumpled, pillows askew. The nightstand lamp was off. and the window was latched firmly from the inside. I stepped inside, scanning the armoire where his clothes hung neatly, everything intact. I crossed to the bedside to check where Mr. Anders had slept. No one there. My pulse thundered. "Look," Officer Garcia whispered from the doorway, shining his beam at the far wall. I joined him. On the quilt, pinned by a single sewing needle, lay the index card. April 6th, 12, M. Anders, found sleeping alone. Tragically, good night. The words were written in the same spidery scrawl as the others. My stomach twisted. I reached out, fingertips grazing the card. It was damp, whisper slick with condensation. I stared at it, venous blood surging in my temples. "What did I miss?" I murmured, voice reverberating. The calendar had been turned. Today's date, April 5th, bore a small crease where a day was folded back, as though someone had manipulated time under that roof. I flicked my flashlight toward the closet just as the door swung shut with a jolt behind me. I whirled, weapon up, only to find the door on the far side of the room, the one leading to the hallway, now slammed. My flashlight beam jittered as I moved closer. I yanked the door handle. It didn't budge. The hallway remained sealed. My breath stuttered. I turned to the closet door. It was slightly ajar. Beyond lay nothing but darkness. My flashlight revealed the corner where the killer had hung his jacket. It was gone. Everything was gone. But I heard that rasp again, coming from directly behind me. Soft, close, as if someone whispered into my collar. I pivoted, heart in my throat. The window curtains stirred, though there was no breeze. I stepped toward the foot of the bed, scanning the room. The pattern of pictures on the wall seemed off. Family photographs, once aligned with equal spacing, now sat tilted, as though someone had passed through and touched them. My foot hit something soft on the floor. My shoe socked the damp tip of a syringe. A chill flooded me. I shined my light down. A thin trail of muddy water led from the bedside across the carpet toward the bathroom door. I stepped forward. Each footfall felt like a countdown, a march toward a moment I dreaded. I knelt to inspect the syringe. Empty but sticky with residue, I recognized the brand. Same formulation as the lethal dose used in prior attacks. A keening sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach as I realized Mr. Anders wasn't here. He had vanished between help and save. I moved to the bathroom door, knocking lightly. "This is the police," I called. "Open up." No answer. The door was unlocked but heavy, and I pushed it open slowly. The bulb over the sink flickered, casting the room in pulsing light. The mirror above the porcelain basin was fogged, only partially from humidity. Through the smear, I saw my reflection. Uniform, dull, face drawn, eyes rimmed in red. Behind me, in the mirror's reflection, the bathroom's back door stood open, a sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. I spun, but the light revealed only nothing. Empty tile. A scattered trail of footprints leading through the door out into the night. I lurched forward, stepping out the back door into the backyard, lawn damp with dew, only to see the fence behind me. A section pried open, warped wood splintered, wide enough for a person to slip through. Past the gap, the gravel driveway glinted in moonlight. Beyond that, the road stretched dark and empty. My radio crackled in my ear. "Sergeant, suspect sighted fleeing down Maple Ridge Drive, heading southwest." The urgency in Garcia's voice sounded distant, like an echo I heard waking from a nightmare. I pushed past the fence and ran to the driveway, scanning the darkness for any shape that might be moving. I saw only the shimmering curve of the road, silent. I sprinted back, heart hammering, racing through the door into the living room. The windows were intact, no signs of forced entry beyond the fence. Dust motes drifted in the moonbeams. highlighting the incongruity of a normal house that had just been violated. I grabbed the Polaroid from my pocket. It showed Mr. Anders's face, the same serene expression he'd worn before the nightmare. I flipped the photo over and the back bore a note. "See you tomorrow." My pulse stagnated. The voice came again, louder this time, as though spoken behind me. "Thompson." I whipped around, weapon raised, but saw nothing. The living room lamp flickered to life on its own. I yanked off the jacket from the back of the couch, Anders' jacket already stained with dirt and splinter fragments. I breathed hard, mind racing. I ran to the phone on the sideboard and dialed dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. Mr. Anders has disappeared. He's not in the bedroom. The window was closed when we arrived. I need backup down here immediately." My voice trembled with urgency. "Understood, sir. Units en route." I hung up and listened to the thud of my own heartbeat. The house groaned, settling around me as though the walls themselves breathed. I turned to the living room, flashlight in hand. Wine glasses on the coffee table, half-eaten goldfish crackers on a napkin, family photos askew, and the couch where Anders had sat now empty, as though he had never been there at all. The sirens in the distance signaled approaching units, but I felt alarmed. His footprints led into the woods behind the house, deep into the thicket that bordered the creek. The same creek where Gibbons's body had been found. I didn't want to chase him into that maze of shadows. I wanted him caught here, alive. But the killer had planned this departure at 2:14 a.m., when everyone was at their most vulnerable, convinced they could wait for dawn. Now it was nearly 2:20. I had minutes to save him if I could. I sprinted out the back door, leapt over the fence, and dashed across the dew-slick grass toward the edge of the woods. The pine needles at the boundary glowed dimly under the cruiser's lights. I heard my own breath rasp in my chest as I plunged into the shadows. Branches scraped my uniform, clinging to my sleeves. The ground was uneven underfoot. I traced the trail of muddy footprints into the gloom. Each step depressed the needles, leaving a telltale pattern. I raised my voice, commanding, crisp, "Michael Anders. Unit 24!" "If you're out here, put your hands up." The forest swallowed my words, echoing them into silence. My radio crackled. "Backup arriving," said Garcia. I gritted my teeth and pressed on. The footprints led to a small clearing beside the creek, water running swift and low, cutting through rocks. I scanned the area. No sign of Anders, just broken twigs and displaced stones. But I saw something else. A scrap of cloth caught on a branch. A small patch of sweatshirt, soft cotton stained with dew and a hint of salt. I grabbed it, damp and cold, and pressed it to my face. Anders's scent shook me. He had been here. My mind spun as I realized the clearing formed a triangle of escape routes. East into deeper woods, west toward a small service road used for fishing access, and south across the creek on a narrow footlog, then to a farmhouse set a quarter-mile away. If he'd slipped through those pines silently, like a ghost, I might not catch him in time. I radioed quietly. "He's at the creek. Small clearing. Likely crossed south, footlog. We need to converge." Over the radio came static, then Ingram's voice. "Got it. 3 units heading to the service road. Garcia and I will flank the north bank." I knelt by the creek's edge, shining my flashlight downstream. The current created a gentle hiss, like a lullaby, mocking lullaby for a man in flight. I scanned the bank, rocks, reeds, broken sticks jutting from the mud. Then I saw them. Narrow boot prints pressed into damp earth, leading onto the log spanning the creek. A slip here would mean plunging in. I peered carefully. The log was slick with algae. I drew my weapon and placed a single foot on the log. The wood shifted beneath me. For a moment, my heart leaped in my throat, but I held steady. I placed my other foot, then paused. The opposite bank lay 5 feet away, but the crossing looked treacherous under moonlight. I inched across, arm outstretched, weapon halfway raised in case he lay in wait. I slipped once, panicked, but caught myself and pressed on. My boots hit the soft ground on the far side, and I exhaled in relief. I moved forward. Branches snagged my sleeves. The forest undergrowth hushed with my presence. The moon peeked through the canopy, illuminating a narrow footpath. I followed it, sighting the distant glow of a farmhouse's kitchen window. Its light seemed warm, like a beacon calling to me, but I knew better than to trust a single window. I crouched behind a mossy oak and peered. The farmhouse porch light was dead. The kitchen window glowed dimly. I heard gravel crunching beyond the clearing. A vehicle door closing, perhaps a patrol car. Ingram's footsteps sounded behind me. He whispered, "He's in the kitchen." I trained my flashlight and through the window saw Anders, shaken, eyes wide, standing near a counter, sipping water from a chipped mug. He seemed stunned, as though remembering he was alive. The front door to the farmhouse was a sliding screen, partially open, a path from this clearing to a new trap. Ingram and I exchanged glances. "We move in on 3, he hissed. "Cover point secure." Garcia's voice crackled in my earpiece. "I've got your 6. Ready on my mark. I placed my hand on Anders's shoulder as I eased open the screen. He stiffened, spun, and his face registered astonishment. "Officer Thompson?" he whispered, voice cracking. "They're going to kill me," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied firmly. "They're not going to get to you again." Our radios buzzed. "Advance. Suspect is in the attic." My heart sank. The shooter, Jonathan Blake, had slipped ahead of us. He had melted away somewhere deeper in the property. I realized that as long as his pattern persisted, whispering names in the dark, exploiting vulnerability, no house would ever be safe. A sudden flash of movement caught my eye through the window behind Anders. Blake, sprinting toward the back door of the farmhouse. I raised my weapon and fired a warning shot at the glass panes, shattering them. Blake paused, hand on the doorknob. He turned, eyes blazing. He dropped the doorknob and charged toward the tree line. Anders dropped the mug, shards of ceramic scattering. He staggered back as Ingram caught his arm. I sprinted after Blake again, crossing muddy turf, reaching the edge of a cleared garden. I saw him slip under a garden gate and vanish through a narrow gap in the hedgerow. I pursued, branches whipping my face. Another shot rang out. Ingram firing from the farmhouse window, clipping Blake's shoulder. He stumbled, grunting, but kept running. I closed the distance, panting, memory of every chase etched in my muscles. By the time Blake reached the creek again, I was a few feet behind. He lunged across the slick log, but his stumble from the bullet wound slowed him. He slipped on the algae, arms flailing. I dove forward, tackling him just as his foot left the log, sending him plunging into cold water waist deep. He let out a strangled scream, half pain, half fury, and thrashed to stay above the surface. I knelt at the bank, aiming my flashlight on his face, pale and etched with surprise. The water foamed around us as I pointed the barrel at his temple. "Stop!" I commanded. He looked up, eyes wild, lips cracked, blood mixing with creek water. "You don't understand," he rasped, voice warbling from the cold. He spat, foam flecking my uniform. He sank another inch, shivering. "You can't stop them." He struggled, but the current washed over his boots. I gripped his hair and jerked his head up, water dribbling from his forehead. "Freeze!" I roared, my voice flinging across the creek. "I will shoot you now." He shrank back, blinking, limbs trembling. I cuffed one wrist under water, then his other hand. His head lolled to one side, and I felt a fleeting sadness at the wreckage of a man who had once worn a badge. But I could not let guilt slow me now. I yanked him to the bank. Water sloshed at my boots. As I hauled him onto dry ground, Ingram arrived and snapped the cuff on his other wrist, while Garcia checked for his pistol at his waistband. It had been ripped away in the struggle. Blake lay on his back, heavy as stone, chest heaving. His gaze flicked from me to the house, and then to the dark sky, where stars shimmered indifferently. "Finish it," he whispered, voice gurgling. "End it." I knelt beside him. "It's over, Blake. You're going to prison for a long time." He spat again, blood mingling with tears. "They'll keep whispering. You can't kill the fear." His eyes closed. Medical personnel arrived as Blake was hauled to his feet. He muttered something about gallows as he was sent to the ambulance. I stood, watching as he was loaded in. As the EMTs covered him with a blanket, I noticed the handprint-shaped bruise on his cheek. I thought of how easily masks slip in the dark, how a savior can become a predator behind a badge. Back at the farmhouse, I helped Anders inside. He leaned on the doorway, soaked to the waist, shaking with cold. He wrapped his arms around himself, eyes hollow. Ingram grabbed a blanket and draped it over his shoulders. "You'll be okay now," I said. He nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the window where Blake had fired the shot. "I never should have let someone in," he choked. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did nothing wrong. You trusted in someone wearing a badge. That was the right instinct." I believed it. When fear creeps in, you cling to anything that seems safe, even a uniform. I scanned the bedrooms. Bric-a-brac knocked askew. Dressers moved. Blake had ransacked the place in his mind, looking for weak spots. I needed Anders safe. I said, "We'll move you to a safe location tonight. We'll set up a temporary room at the station." He nodded, half asleep. I led him to a spare recliner and tucked blankets around him. His breathing slowed. I flicked off the lamp and turned toward the door, where Garcia and Ingram were conferring quietly. Each of us bore exhaustion in our posture. Shoulders stooped, shadows under our eyes. We exchanged glances that acknowledged a devastating truth. We'd caught this killer tonight, but the network that spawned him might still be alive. In Blake's pockets, we'd found fragments of files, hard drives stamped with hospital logos from 3 different states. This was far from over. I walked to the front window and looked out at the maples trembling in moonlight. The sky was a deep, bruised indigo, flecked with pinpricks of starlight. Somewhere in another town, another name was being scheduled. Another whisper plotted. I barely felt the cold as I stared at the road, imagining the next victim pressing a hand to the glass, believing that no one could harm them at that hour. I heard that rasp again, so soft I wasn't sure if it was real. "Thompson?" I turned, reflecting the lamp's glow in the window. For a moment, I thought I saw a dark figure in the flash of moonlight, standing at the edge of the trees, watching. I blinked, and the shape was gone, but the echo remained. Thompson. My pulse pounded. I swallowed thickly and steadied my grip on the window frame. I realized that catching Blake was only a reprieve. The darkness had slipped its leash long ago. The whisper would persist in every hush after sunset, every rustle of leaves, every creak of a floorboard, and no amount of evidence or surveillance could silence it. I glanced back at Anders, his head lolling against the recliner's cushion, trusting us to keep him safe. I wanted to promise him it was over, but I could not. I pressed my hand to the window pane, the glass cool under my palm, and closed my eyes. Around me, the farmhouse settled into uneasy quiet. The creaks and groans of wood framed the hush, as if the house itself sighed under the weight of its secrets. I took a steadying breath, feeling the damp wood under my feet, a reminder that I was still alive and I had to act. A promise flickered in my chest. I would hunt every flicker of the darkness until each whisper was drowned by the chorus of every truth I could reveal. But as I opened my eyes, I saw that the window's reflection carried two shadows, mine and another just behind me. No face, no features, only the outline of a man whose gaze never left me. I whirled, weapon raised, but the hallway lay empty, lit only by the faraway glow of the living room lamp. I lowered my gun, the echo of my heartbeat in my ears. The reflection in the window cracked, just a flicker, like the glass had shuddered, revealing the star-flecked sky again. I exhaled, my breath visible in a small puff. For a moment I thought the reflection belonged to Blake, come back for revenge. But he was shackled in an ambulance on his way to a cell. So who or what had followed me here? A faint whisper swept through the room, so soft it might have been the wind. Thompson. I snapped off the window light and stood in the darkness. The living room lamp cast long shadows that danced across the ceiling. I pressed my back against the wall, weapon still in hand, and waited. The farmhouse lay silent, but I could feel the tension coiling like a serpent at my feet. Somewhere, beyond the reach of the light, the whisper waited, patient, relentless. I took a step back into the hallway, every nerve taut. The night was far from over. The final terror wasn't just catching a killer, it was realizing that the darkness had no face, no name. It could slip from one identity to another, always one step ahead. No cage, no hospital, no cell could hold it forever. And no matter how many suspects we captured, the whisper would endure. In the hush between heartbeats, in the spaces between streetlights, in every terrified mind that heard their name called in the dead of night. I slid my hand along the textured wallpaper, finding the doorknob of the office. I closed the door behind me, locking it. I dropped the magazine from my weapon and checked the rounds, a reflex that offered a sliver of reassurance. Then I sank into the desk chair, pressing my forehead to its cool edge. The Polaroid of Michael Anders lay atop the desk, next to the photo of Blake's mugshot. I stared at the pair, one man who died prematurely in a shallow creek, another who threw himself into darkness with fervor. I traced their faces with tired eyes, memorizing features that would haunt my dreams. And through the sliver of space beneath the door, I heard it again. So soft I wasn't sure if it was real or a figment of exhaustion. Thompson. I held my breath. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I reached for the light switch but hesitated, knowing that any illumination would claim the darkness. Instead, I whispered into the hush, "Show yourself." The whisper came again, closer this time, as though someone stood directly behind me. "I'm always here." I spun, weapon raised, but saw only my own reflection in the glass of the window pane. Eyes wide, face gaunt, uniform rumpled. The heartbeat of my chest echoed in my ears, each pulse a reminder that I was alive. I exhaled slowly, and the whisper faded into the silence, leaving me alone in that cramped office, confronted by a truth I could not deny. As long as the night remained, the whisper would endure, relentless, unending, and impossible to silence. I lowered my weapon and slid out of the chair, stepping toward the door. In my hand, I held both Polaroids, each a fragment of a name called too late, I pressed them to my chest, a burden I would carry into every dark corner of this world. Tomorrow I would continue the hunt. Tonight I would face the whisper alone, knowing that the final nightmare was not the darkness beyond the window, but the one inside me, my own name forever echoing in the void, refusing to let me rest. And as I slipped the Polaroids back into their folder and turned out the light, I heard it one last time, more urgent and intimate than before. Thompson. The door clicked shut behind me and the office was plunged into total darkness. I remember the exact moment I realized something was terribly wrong. It was May 14th, 2011, and I was running the graveyard shift on State Route 93, just south of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The county dispatcher patched a call through about an abandoned Nissan Altima on the shoulder. Engine still idling, lights on. The road was nearly deserted. Just me and the hum of my cruiser cruising down cracked asphalt, under the dim glow of a single overhead lamp. When the call came in, I'd been halfway through my shift, coffee gone cold in the cup holder, and my eyes heavy from the long haul. I parked behind the Altima, tires crunching on gravel that spills off the edge of the road. The car's hazard lights blinked in the rearview mirror, casting a strobe effect that skittered across nearby trees. My hand hovered over the door handle for a moment, and I took a slow breath. I flicked on my flashlight, stepping out onto the pavement. The night air tasted of damp leaves and gasoline from passing trucks. I tapped the side of the car with my baton, just a soft click against the plastic bumper. No movement inside. Dispatch, Unit 7, I'm out with the Altima. No plate tag in the system, but engine is running. Driver not in view. My voice sounded flat, too calm, like I'd said the same thing 100 times before. Still, I rattled off the precise coordinates, latitude and longitude memorized from my onboard GPS. I'm going to check the perimeter. Request K9 for possible tracks into the woods. The dispatcher said, "Copy, Unit 7, K9 en route." I clicked off the mic and moved around to the passenger side, shining my light through tinted windows. The seats were empty. I climbed onto the shoulder and scanned the tree line. Somewhere out there, something, or someone, had gotten out. The moon was a thin crescent overhead, leaving most of the roadside in near blackness. I thought of every missing person bulletin I'd filed over the years. Kids who vanished from porches, drifters who disappeared after a night at the bar, and the countless abandoned cars that haunted every trooper's nightmares. Gravel crunched behind me. My head snapped around. Nothing but the night breeze rustling the undergrowth. My gut tightened. I flicked the beam toward the trees. The K9 team would take at least 15 minutes to arrive. I wasn't going to wait that long. I eased forward, boots heavy, flashlight shaking against my palm. Each step felt like crossing a creaking bridge, and the forest ahead seemed to swallow sound whole. I caught sight of a footprint in the soft mud just beyond the guardrail. Barefoot, small. I knelt and knelt until I traced the toes in my mind, wondering if it belonged to a kid like last month's missing foster teen or someone older. A sudden snap of a branch jolted me upright. I swung the flashlight toward the noise and saw nothing. The darkness pressed in, thick, unyielding. I edged forward until I reached a rusted chain-link fence that marked the boundary between the pavement and the woods. The bark on the nearest oak was scratched, gouged, as if something had dragged its nails across. I brought my hand down onto the fence, fingers brushing cold metal, and felt hairs rise on the back of my neck. "Hello?" My voice cracked the silence. I held the beam steady on the fence, waiting. My breath came faster now, hot in my mask. the beam caught something on the other side, a small red backpack, half crushed under a fallen branch. I flicked the light down. In damp leaf litter, a shaky shoe print. I felt the air shift, as if I'd crossed an unseen threshold. Something wasn't right, emotion my training wouldn't prepare me for. I radioed again. "Dispatch, I have a backpack, looks like a child's or teen's. The prints lead north into the pines, recommend immediate backup." Only static replied, no response. I frowned and pressed the mic button again. Nothing but that crushed stutter of static. I reached out to brush the backpack free, but stopped when the beam glinted off something else. A child's bicycle wheel caught in brambles. I followed the rim to where the frame lay under leaves. The handlebars twisted unnaturally, and the faded sticker on the crossbar read, "Ella. Ella." I thought of the 10-year-old runaway we'd been searching for a week ago, Ella Monroe, last seen riding her bike away from Aunt Clara's house. I'd felt my pulse stiffen then, hoping I was wrong, but here was her bike, hours from any neighborhood, headlights lighting a silent scene of abandonment. My radio still dead. For a moment, I stood still and let the intertwining dread coil tighter around my lungs. I swallowed. Without another thought, I threw the beam deeper into the trees. My boots slid in mud and wet leaves. With every footstep, I felt as though I was sinking further into some primal trap, an expectation that I would find her, or whatever remained of her before the night swallowed her whole. The forest responded with a soft chorus of unseen creatures. Crickets so dense you could hear them through your bones. The smell of fresh pine mixed with earth and something else, metallic, sharp, like blood. I moved toward the noise until I stood before an old hunting blind, gray planks rotting at the seams, stools cradled inside by mosquito netting torn to ribbons. The door was only latching by a stick wedged under the threshold. I shone my light inside. Nothing but a layer of dust and the pattern of someone's footprints on the wooden floor. They led from the cracked window toward the door I'd just peered through. I took a steadying breath. "Ella?" I called softly, leaning my shoulder into the door. It creaked open. Inside, the ground was scattered with small tokens. A candy wrapper, a single pink hair tie, a slice of bread half-eaten and rotting at the edge of the stool. I knelt, fingertips probing those things. Each relic felt like a promise broken. My flashlight moved to the corner and froze. A scrap of fabric clung to a nail that held an old deer mount. The mottled cloth looked like part of a jacket. I stepped closer, and my beam found long blonde hair draped over the edge. A motionless shape slumped against the wall. I swallowed past the dryness in my throat. I steadied the light on her face, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my ears. But it wasn't Ella. It was someone else. Older, face pale, eyes closed. She wore a windbreaker I recognized from a missing adult case 2 counties over. I rose, backing away, twisting the radio mic in my hand. Finally, static broke loose, then the dispatcher's voice. "Unit 7, do you copy?" My throat felt sandpaper as I whispered, "I have a body," down in the hunting blind. By the time backup arrived, 15 minutes later, the scene was no longer just the forest. It extended to every knot in my gut. They found the woman's phone in her pocket. Last ping from a location 40 miles from where she lived. No signs of foul play beyond the obvious abandonment. No footprints leading away from the blind. It was as though she had simply evaporated after slipping inside. Meanwhile, Ella's bicycle and backpack vanished without a trace when we returned with evidence bags and crime scene tape. That night marked something in me. A fracture between my training and whatever haunted these roads. I logged every detail in my report, but inside I felt hollow. The rush I used to get from solving cases was replaced by a cold slump of dread. I kept thinking about the small footprints and that teenage bike. My dreams turned to that hunting blind, her unmoving form. But there were more nights like that to come. 2 months later, in mid-July, I was posted to the outskirts of Conway, Arkansas on U.S. Highway 64. It was the kind of stretch most cruisers avoided if they could. Long straights flanked by scrub pine and rank grass. The kind of place where a lone cruiser was easy prey for anyone looking to stay hidden. Around midnight, the county dispatcher relayed a second story. A gas station attendant had called 911 to report a man in the convenience store calmly asking for water, then sliding out the back door just as the officer rolled up. The station was a lone building under fluorescent lights that buzzed with a nauseating regularity. I pulled into the pump area, my cruiser's lights bathing the cracked pavement. Inside, the attendant stared at me with vacant eyes, pale, ashen, like he'd seen something no human eyes should. He pointed to the back storage door, half open, a narrow line of darkness beyond. I called it in. Unit 7, Conway PD, I'm on scene. Something's off. The tandem doors are ajar. No sign of a suspect. Attendants in shock. Area's clear. She nodded as though she couldn't muster more words. I stepped past the snack racks looking for footprints or a sign of struggle. The back door was swinging gently, hinges squealing. I shone my light into the storage room. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Energy drink cartons piled like offering stones. At the far end, where the emergency exit led to a fenced lot, I saw a patch of wet concrete, darker than the rest, and lean-to stacks of empty crates forming a tunnel-like path. I moved closer, senses keyed tight. Once I reached the crates, I saw something half buried in straw, a single men's glove, black leather soaked through. No other glove next to it. I felt a twinge of panic. A lone glove always meant someone had been here, likely in a hurry. My hand brushed the handle of my firearm as I whispered, "Anyone back here?" No answer. Just the hum of faulty lights overhead. I stepped out the exit door into the lot. Empty, except for a battered ambulance parked near a chain-link fence. The gas station's neon sign reflected in the ambulance's windows, casting fractured patterns across the cracked windshield. I circled it, but found nothing more. No tracks in the grass, no footprints toward the highway. I radioed again. Negative tracks. No one in sight. K9 crew can grid, search the field. Dispatch replied, copy that. K9 ETA 5 minutes. I waited, the world narrowing to the whisper of cicadas and the buzz of my radio. A low rumble sounded beyond the chain-link fence. Tires on gravel. I swung my light to catch 2 unmarked black SUVs pulling up behind the gas pumps, tinted windows reflecting the station's sickly glow. I lifted my hand to wave them off, but stopped when the heat from their bulging tires hit me. One door opened. A tall, silver-haired man stepped out. Crisp suit, pressed shirt, no badge visible, but the confidence of someone used to authority. The other SUV's window rolled down slowly, revealing a dark-eyed woman in plain clothes peering at me. "Officer," the woman said calmly, voice flat. "Please step away from the exit." I gripped my radio, ready to call for backup, but found I couldn't speak. The woman held up a thin badge, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "This is an active investigation. Please stand down." I squeezed out. What investigation?" My voice came out clipped. The man in the suit stepped forward, arms folded. "We have reason to believe this location is involved in a possible abduction ring," he said, watching me as though I were a piece on a chessboard. "You're clear to stand by. Do not interfere." My pulse shot. The gas station attendant peered out the window. eyes wide as I motioned him inside. I tried to argue, tried to call dispatch, but the agents were already disappearing inside the convenience store. The attendant locked the door behind them. I heard a muffled disturbance, boxes crashing, something heavy dragging. Then one agent came back out, unzipped his jacket and tossed a plastic evidence bag at me. The bag slid across the asphalt. Inside was a driver's license, female, age 22, from Little Rock, her picture eyes wide with fear. Under it was another small leather glove, matching the one I'd found. I felt a cold wave rise. I looked up, but both agents had melted back inside. I walked to the pile of crates, shining my light through the slats. Nothing but darkness. I scooped up the glove and license, jaw clenched, and backed through the convenience store to my cruiser. Before I climbed in, I glanced toward the door. Silence. Not a single agent in sight. It's as if they'd never been there. My radio crackled to life. Unit 7, do you copy? I rolled forward, kicking up gravel. Copy, I managed to say, voice hollow. I'm pulling back. Possible federal involvement. That night, the agents never returned my calls. Investigators later told me they'd classified the case due to national security concerns. Never explained why. The woman's license traced back to 2 months earlier when she'd reported a stolen car outside Little Rock. Her family said she never answered her phone after she left a bar with friends. We never found her. Only that glove and her license. I still carry that license in my wallet. The photo stares at me whenever I pull it out, wide eyes like a trapped animal. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd followed those agents inside, if I'd pressed them to let me help. But that night, the federal suit and the quiet assurance in her voice told me I had no choice. Months stretched on, and I moved to patrol Ramsey County, Minnesota on Interstate 35. It was late September, and the air had that sharp edge of approaching winter. At 2:02 a.m., dispatch relayed a call. Driver 6 miles south of Junction 47. White Dodge Ram parked diagonally, headlights off, driver nowhere in sight. I tapped the siren off and slid my cruiser across the grassy median. The Ram sat precariously on the shoulder. I cut the engine and felt the cold settle under my collar. My flashlight beam illuminated the front windshield, cracked, spider-webbed at center. I tapped on the driver's window, no response. My mirror caught the reflection of a lone figure moving behind the truck, reaching toward the bed. I darted around the rear bumper. The figure jerked, and for a moment I thought I saw a dark, hooded sweatshirt. I called, "Hands where I can see them." No answer. I flicked the light onto the figure. A teenage boy, maybe 15, crouched low as if hiding. His eyes were huge in the beam, cheeks hollow, something clutched in his right hand. I stepped forward, but suddenly he bolted across the highway lanes, crashing through the median fence toward the forest beyond. The rain had picked up, slickening the grass. He stumbled, face twisting with panic. I radioed for backup and gave chase on foot, flashlight slipping from my grasp as I plunged into the woods. The mud sucked at my boots. Branches lashed at my face. The boy screamed, raw, trembling, an unimaginable sound for someone so young. By the time I emerged back onto the highway, he'd vanished. No sign of him except a single wet footprint at the edge of the tree line and the thing he'd dropped on the pavement. A camcorder, recorder still running, its red light blinking. Inside the device, I found footage that still haunts me. Night vision clips of the boy filming some shadowy figure moving just beyond the range. Faint hiss as he whispered, "It's following. I think it's watching me." The tape ended abruptly, mid-sentence. I handed it off to detectives, but they insisted it was a prank or staged. They never identified the boy. Months later, They cleared the truck as stolen from Fargo and credited it to local joyriders, ignoring the tape entirely. I kept a copy, though. It's stored at home in a box I rarely open. Every time I do, I see that pale face flickering under infrared light, eyes wide and afraid. Now, as I sit here, somewhere near Duluth, on the shores of Lake Superior, I think about those nights. Finger cold after midnight, the weight of my holster, the persistent hum in my ears of unseen things moving just beyond the radius of my flashlight. I think of the child's footprints on Route 93, the hunting blind in Conway, that federal agent slipping into the back of a dying gas station, and that pale teenager who vanished into the woods. I think of every abandoned vehicle, every cold case folder that sits on a dusty shelf, and every face I couldn't save. There's one image that never leaves my mind. The crescent moon just before dawn, cutting through the woods at Ramsey County, and the silhouette of that boy, still running, still terrified, and just out of reach. I leave my cruiser's engine running most nights when I park. It's a small comfort, proof I'm still here, but I know the engine's hum means nothing to those who disappear. Because in the end, it isn't the darkness that takes them. It's what lies beyond the darkness, waiting in the silence. That's why I keep walking these roads, flashlight in hand, heartbeat echoing in my skull. I move forward with every case, chasing footprints that fade into nothing, hoping someday I'll find a trace, a sign that someone is still there, somewhere just beyond the edge of the light. I never stopped counting the nights when I didn't hear dispatch's voice crackle in my earpiece or feel the thrum of my cruiser guiding me through the pitch-black stretches of highway. My mind became a map of every mile marker where something went wrong, every pull-out where a lone tire thumped over gravel, every overgrown turnoff where the grass whispered beneath the wheels. In the months after Ramsey County, I sought assignments in places that felt mercifully mundane. Traffic stops at dawn, routine checks of parked semis, the occasional juvenile runaway followed home by a neighborly tow. But even in daylight, I felt the state of my own mind shifting, like the temperature dropped inside my chest every time I passed an overgrown shoulder. Spring came in 2012 with pale mornings and blooming tulips along the median on Route 11 in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. I was partnered with a rookie, Agent Martinez, an eager kid fresh from the academy who still believed every missing child case had an answer. One late afternoon, Martin called in a tip about a car stuck in a ditch under the bridge over Valley Creek. He said a motorist reported the car half submerged with the front bumper cracked and teetering above thorn bushes. We arrived around 7 p.m., exactly when the golden hour made the trees look like they were set on fire at their edges. That beauty only made the scene feel wrong. The car was an old Model T Ford, painted dull gray with rust blooming along the doors. No license plate, no name on the registration stickers. The engine was cold, but keys hung from the ignition. Antique brass keys shaped like a skeleton's hand. Martinez and I stepped onto the damp embankment, boots sinking in mud. The air smelled like fresh rain and overheated brakes. I radioed dispatch. Unit 7 and 12, Franklin PD, found a Model T abandoned along Route 11, no plates. Keys still in ignition. Investigating perimeter, Martinez shined her light through the dusty windshield. The seats were tattered leather, cracked into spiderweb patterns. The trunk was open, revealing a pile of folded blankets, a half-empty thermos of coffee, and, curiously, an old accordion, its bellows bent like a broken rib. I felt my stomach twist as I climbed around the hood to check under the car. No footprints, no drag marks, just grass crushed beneath the frame. The ground around the creek had shallow mud, but no tracks leading deeper into the woods. I straightened and pointed toward the bridge's underside, where slivers of light from the setting sun cast zigzag shadows. The roar of the creek seemed louder in the hush. I told Martinez, "Something doesn't add up. Model Ts haven't been on the road for decades. Someone brought this here intentionally." She nodded, flicking her light toward the creek bank. There, lying half-buried in silt, was a battered journal, leather-bound and waterlogged. The pages sagged, smeared with ink that had bloated in the moisture. I carefully lifted it, using latex gloves so I wouldn't contaminate anything. On the cover, in faint gold script, I read, "Samuel Rivers, 1932. Martinez looked puzzled. Are we chasing a decades-old cold case? I felt a hollow ache where my heart had once been. More like a question no one's prepared to answer. By the time the coroner's van arrived, darkness had swallowed the creek. We searched the immediate area for any sign of a corpse or bones, but the water was murky and fast-moving. Under the bridge, shadows clung like cobwebs. I shone my light into the water. It revealed nothing but swirling eddies. The journal went into evidence. Later, I read that Samuel Rivers was a prospector who disappeared without a trace in 1934, presumed dead after rumors of a mining accident. No mention of an accordion, no mention of the journal resurfacing. That night, I drove home with a knot in my chest. The asphalt glowed wet under my headlights, and the guardrail's paint peeled like a sunburn. I thought of all the cases that felt disconnected from modern reality. Ghost cars, faded photographs, whispers of some presence that refused to stay buried. I thought of Ella. I thought of the gas station in Conway, the Bryanville barn. The boy on I-35. My windshield streaked with rain as I wondered if I'd spent my life chasing footprints in mud. Late that spring, I received orders to transfer to Des Moines' metropolitan jurisdiction, working as a liaison with juvenile services. It meant hands-on work, reuniting teens with parents or foster homes, handling youth in crisis, trying to keep them from slipping through the cracks. But every time I sat at the table with a teenager who had pajamas swiped by some anonymous Good Samaritan, I saw the same fear in their eyes that I'd seen in the hunting blind. They didn't show up on missing persons posters. They showed up in social services records as runaways, kids who ran from one foster home to another until they learned how to disappear. One night in June, I got a call from a halfway house. One of the residents was unaccounted for. He was a slight kid named Dante, 18 years old, last seen smoking a cigarette under a flickering street lamp behind the Renner apartments. They said the kid left a note that read, "Don't come looking for me." I met with the house manager just after midnight. The parking lot was empty except for a lone sedan with a dented fender. I walked over, keying my radio. "Unit 7, I'm at Renner House, missing juvenile, named Dante. He left in dark clothes." I checked the lounge. Black couches, stale popcorn smell, overturned soda cans. No sign of Dante's boots. I went outside to the back alley, flashlight in hand. Graffiti on the brick wall glowed under a flickering orange lamp. "Gone's not gone." My chest tightened. That plastered scrawl felt like a warning. My footsteps echoed as I traced the alley to the dumpster. The metal lid lay open, clanged against the wall. I shone my light inside. No body, no rags, just crushed soda cans and the smell of rotten milk. I moved to the fence line, cinder blocks stacked to make a makeshift ladder. The kid could have hopped to the other side, slipped into the vacant lots beyond. I radioed for family contact information. A voice crackled back. Dante's foster mother says he was distressed, talked about someone following him. I paused, piecing it together. A runaway thinking he's being chased. I felt a flash of something familiar, the terror Dante must have felt. like any step could be his last. Outside, cicadas sang, mocking me. I climbed to the lot above and scanned the homes across the street. Settlement houses stood like tombstones in the moonlight. Distant church bells tolled. I called for K9 to scent track. The dog was at least 10 minutes out. I waited by the dumpsters, leaned against a rusted roll-up door. I thought of my own teenage years, driving down the highway in a junker, feeling invincible until a cop pulled me over. I'd run with friends into the night, chased the thrill of being free. But Dante was 16 years younger than me. He didn't have worn tires or country roads. He had nothing but a fugitive's heart pounding in a city of strangers. When the K9 finally arrived, the dog's muzzle dipped into the alley, sniffing the car's residual heat, then darted across the street toward an abandoned school bus parked at the edge of a field. I jogged after them, hands gripping my belt. Kids in broken-out school buses used to be childhood horror stories. Grim body in a seat covered with dust. I found the dog pawing at the bus's rear exit. The latch was broken. The door swung inward on squeaky hinges. Inside, I found a blanket draped over a row of seats, and on it, a pair of blood-stained jeans soaked through at the knees. Next to the jeans, a scrap of paper. I ran from the shadows, but the shadows caught me. My radio stuttered. "Unit 7, you copy?" I inhaled twice, sweat beating at my temples. "I have evidence. Kid's clothes here, no sign of him inside. Blood, but no body." I cursed under my breath. The dog barked once and ran to the front door. It was sealed shut with boards. I shone the light at the window. Something flickered. There, between the seats, I saw a slight rise and fall, like someone breathing. I knelt, swept aside dust, and saw a pair of brown eyes blinking at me through a crack. Dante, pale as ash, his shirt pulled to his chin. I slid off my gloves and eased the door open. He slid out, shaking, arms held tight against his chest. I felt my knees threaten to buckle. "Dante, it's okay," I said, voice rasped. He looked up, face pinched, chin quivering. I knelt, hands open. "It's me, Detective Forrester." He formed one word. "He's here." My throat went dry. I thought back to all the unmarked SUVs, the agents who spoke in clipped tones, the invisible forces that seemed to watch from shadows. "Who's here?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He pointed to the empty aisle, where the moonlight filtered through shattered windows. "They never leave. I hear their footsteps at night." He began to tremble. The dog nuzzled his leg. I put a hand on Dante's shoulder, feeling bones like dry twigs. I radioed for medical services and rode him back, wondering if I'd ever fully escape that sense of being watched. That summer, I accepted an assignment to mentor new recruits at the Tennessee Highway Patrol Training Academy. It was an odd decision. I was still tethered to every case that had slipped through my fingers. But I hoped that sharing lessons learned from those fractured nights would help someone else avoid my mistakes. I taught them to trust what they saw on the pavement: the half-buried shoe, the empty car, the path of succumbing flashlight beams. I told them that sometimes the worst danger wasn't a man with a gun. It was the dark itself, pressing on you until you couldn't tell where your own fear ended and the night began. On my last teaching night, I took a seat in the back of the lecture hall, dim lights above, rows of cadets staring up at me. I showed them a collage of crime scene photos: the Model T under the bridge, the lone glove at Conway, Dante's blood-stained jeans in the school bus. Each slide flickered with its own story, unfinished, unresolved. I spoke softly. "You'll see things that don't make sense. You'll drive long roads where the radio cuts out and your flashlight fails. You'll find objects with no owner and faces frozen in fear. Trust your gut, trust the silence, and remember, Not every answer can be written on paper. Cadets scribbled notes, but I saw a few of them lean forward, eyes widening. I wondered if they believed me or thought it was just cautionary fiction, part of the mythos we handed to rookies. When the session ended, I collected my notes and looked out the window beyond the projector screen. The parking lot was empty except for one cruiser idling under a lamp. The engine's hum seemed to echo in the empty hall. I turned off the mic and stepped out into the cool night. My final patrol before retirement was scheduled for a weekend check on Route 78 in Wyoming County, Pennsylvania. That stretch of rural road felt familiar. Long straightaways, thick woods on each side, a handful of farmhouses set back from the blacktop. I decided I'd drive it alone for the last time, embrace the insomnia that had settled in my bones. I started my shift at 11 p.m., earpiece snug, flashlight in the passenger seat, notebook on the console. I thought of the Dodge that disappeared in Minnesota, the girl in the hunting blind, the boy in the abandoned bus. I imagined I'd see something else. One last clue to tie every loose end. At 12:42 a.m., I passed mile marker 35. A beat-up red pickup sat at an angle on the shoulder. No tail lights, but the engine idled. I sighed. Another one. I flipped on my lights and parked 10 yards behind. The driver's door was open. No one seated at the wheel. A satellite dish on the roof of the nearby farmhouse faintly reflected the cruiser's light. I approached, sliding my hand to the holster. The bed of the truck held 2 shipping crates strapped down with rope. I flipped the lid of the nearest crate. Inside lay a stack of folded letters sealed with red wax. The topmost envelope bore a child's drawing, a stick figure standing under a large, dark cloud, raindrops falling like knives. I felt a familiar churn of dread. I stood and turned to the bed's edge. The second crate's lid was ajar. Inside, I saw a folded pair of white shoes laced together, resting on a burlap sack. My breath caught. White shoes only meant one thing. Hospital issued, usually for psychiatric wards or juvenile shelters. I knelt, picked them up, and saw scuff marks on the soles. 8 small scuff marks across each toe. I pocketed the shoes. I lifted one of the letters and slit the wax seal. The ink was shaky but legible. Dear officer, if you found this, I hope you know I'm safe. I hid where no one will come. I'll never be found. Please don't look. The final line was smudged and stamped with a handprint in dried blood. My flashlight beam danced across the nearby tree line. The leaves rustled. I listened. My pulse pounded. I felt like I was standing at the edge of everything I had learned. Every abandoned vehicle, every unclaimed object, every pale face I couldn't save. The world seemed to hold its breath. A sudden gust rattled the trees. I turned in a slow circle. The crates behind me were empty now. No letters, no shoes, nothing. Only the crunch of gravel under my own feet as I climbed back into my cruiser. I parked, engine idling, and closed my eyes. I wondered who wrote that letter. What child or adult, what mind was trapped in a place where hidden meant safe? I thought of Ella, under the hunting blind, and the woman in the bus, and Dante crouched in the half-dark. All of them vanished into the quiet that hums beneath the thrum of an idling engine. I lifted the white shoes, placed them on the passenger seat. With shaking hands, I jammed them under the seat, as though hiding them from the night itself. I drove on, keeping the engine loud, leaving the neon glow of the road behind. Back at my bungalow in Wisconsin, I stashed the shoes in a box with Dante's camcorder tape and Samuel Rivers's journal. In the morning, I would hand them over to the cold cases unit, things you have to keep because no one can look away.